Let's go over the rules of this game. Once a player is awake in their curse technique, they must declare participation in the Culling game at the colony of their choice within 19 days. Any player who breaks the previous rule will be subject to curse technique removal, which will essentially fry the user's brain and kill them. Non-players who enter a colony become players at the moment of entry, and will be considered to have declared participation in the Culling game. Players score points by ending the lives of other players. The point value of a player's life is decided by the Game Master. As a general rule, sorcerers are worth 5 points and non-sorcerers are worth 1 point. Excluding the point value of the player's own life, a player can expend 100 points to negotiate with the Game Master and add a new rule to the game. In accordance with Rule 6, the Game Master must accept any proposed new rule as long as it doesn't have a long-lasting effect on the game. If a player's score remains the same for 19 days, they will be subject to curse technique removal. Hey guys, Living Visionary, I'm coming out to you today with a probably very long video, I'm assuming. I already made 2 JJK videos, one with the Shibuya incident and the other with the Perfect Preparation arc. And this one's just going to be focused on the Culling games. If you want to hear my thoughts on everything before the Culling games, then just check those 2 videos out. I'm going to be doing like a whole entire rough summary of the Culling games, and in between I'm going to be scattering my actual thoughts on like the plot and the characters, and everything I liked and disliked about the entire arc. So if you want to hear my thoughts on something really specific, then timestamps are in the description. So we start the entire arc with seeing everyone's favorite character, the one character that we've been waiting to see the entire series, Setsuko. I don't know if you remember Setsuko, but she was like in episode 1, like all the way like 160 chapters ago, like she was in the occult research club with Itadori. Remember like when he saved her from that curse with Megumi? Yeah, that character. Everyone's favorite character that we've been waiting for like ever. So Kenjaku actually decides to have a little bit of a talk with her to explain that the area that she lives in used to be like this ancient burial ground that he's going to use for the foundation of his battle to the death. And she doesn't exactly vibe with this entire battle to the death, specifically because she lives there.
He is going to blow up the planet, but I live here!
So Kenjaku gives her a choice to either stay and participate in the battle to the death, or she can just wake up and leave somewhere else. And of course, she chooses to not die, and that's when eventually she wakes up outside of the barrier of the Culling game. Oh yeah, and I completely forgot to bring up the entire fact that Kenjaku essentially thanks her for getting along with his son. And the first thought that first person that she thinks of is Itadori, because I don't know, maybe she only has like 2 friends in the entire world. But this entire exchange is simply just supposed to confirm the fact that Kenjaku really is Itadori's mom. Meanwhile, all of our heroes are still looking for Angel, and they decide to split up in groups in order to find her. Hakari and Panda decide to split off to go find Kashimo because they see that he's like one of the strongest people in the Culling games, because he has one of the most, he's one of the people with the most points in the game, so they assume he's the strongest, and if he's the strongest, that means Hakari should be the one to take him on. And Itadori and Megumi are essentially splitting off into colony number 1. But Itadori doesn't really vibe with that because he knows that Sukuna still has plans for Megumi, that he's not fully aware of what the plans are, but he knows that he has plans for Megumi, so he doesn't want to be alone with Megumi. But Megumi just tells him to shut up because he doesn't want to be looked at as like some liability. This is going to be like super ironic later, so just remember like for once that Itadori was being the smartest person in the room. Oh yeah, and Kirara is basically just going to be staying outside of the Culling game because no one is actually able to contact each other when they go to different colonies, so they need her to be the lookout and like watch everything that's going on outside so she can like be like the messenger for everyone. This was basically confirmed when Yuta went to start playing the game by himself already and he didn't contact anyone, and since he went dark so soon, they all just assume that they just can't make contact once they actually go into the barrier. At this point, we have about 7 days and about 12 hours until Megumi's sister has to participate in the Culling game, so the entire team kind of has to like, speed things up as fast as possible because there's like an actual time limit for everything. Itadori and Megumi essentially go in immediately with the hopes of finding Higuruma. But as soon as they go in, they instantly get separated and teleported into 2 different locations. Itadori is teleported way high up into the sky, and as he's falling down, that's when he's attacked by this woman whose curse technique is that her hair is a tiny fighter jet, and he takes her down by using a rock against her? And then her boyfriend shows up with a curse technique that I think his head is a part helicopter. What the fuck is going on here? Meanwhile, Megumi gets jumped by this thought named Remy, but like he beats her super easily off screen. He decides to spare her if she can lead him to Higuruma, but she only agrees if he himself agrees to be her knight in shining armor for the rest of the game. Megumi accepts, but he doesn't mind killing her if she's actually tricking him. And that's when Megumi says, and I quote, "I'm different from Itadori, I don't mind earning 100 points myself," which is an extremely cold line, meaning that he really does not care if he has to actually ask Higuruma for his points or if he has to kill a bunch of people in order to get points to save his sister. He'll do whatever he needs to do. And he'll do like literally anything he needs to do in order to save his sister. We then cut back to Itadori to see him using his ultimate attack, Rock Throw. Weirdly enough, that attack actually doesn't work this time, so he decides to go to his signature move, which is just throwing hands. In the middle of the battle, he realizes the reason for why his Rock Throw was so effective against the woman was because she probably did a binding vow to make her top half super tough to the point where she could just smash through buildings without getting hurt. And it basically made it so that her bottom half was like just as weak, if not weaker than any other human. So he figures that Chopperhead basically has the same weakness. And with a single punch, he just cracks open the dude's skull and he finishes them both off right then and there. But the only problem is the fact that since he's like taken them out, he doesn't have anyone to actually question about in order to figure out where he can find Higuruma. But luckily for him, one of his old classmates from high school, they essentially got a curse technique and they are currently playing within the Culling games. And this dude actually has information on how to find Higuruma, and he basically just says he agrees to lead Itadori to him. And at the same exact time, Remy also tells Megumi where Higuruma is, but she gives an entirely different answer, so that you already know that either Remy or Itadori's old classmate is lying. Like one of the two are lying because they give two completely different answers. And when I first read this, I actually genuinely thought that Gege was gonna subvert our expectations, but like, he doesn't. Like, the nice guy, he tells the truth, and the thought was the one who obviously lied.
そうだ、味方だぜ。ただし、正義の味方だ。お前が地獄へ落ちるのを助けてやる。なあ、かきおい。
But to be completely fair, I suppose that him not subverting my expectations, and I was so sure that he was going to subvert my expectations, means that he still in the end kind of subverted my expectations. And I think that's kind of hilarious. When Megumi figures this out, he immediately gets pissed off and starts throwing hands. Meanwhile, Itadori actually goes and finds Higuruma, and he essentially tries to ask him if he can help him in the Culling games, or at the very least, let him use his 100 points so that he can like make a rule to make it so that they don't actually have to kill each other anymore in order for their own survival. And Itadori thinks that just because Higuruma is like a modern day sorcerer and he's not one of the incarnated ones from like centuries ago who are like crazy and just want to battle, he thinks that Higuruma is going to be like super normal, and he's actually going to be like, yeah, sure Itadori, I'll definitely help you in the Culling games because killing is crazy and bad. But instead, Higuruma does not want anything to do with ending the Culling games. Okay, so something that I didn't actually cover in the beginning of this arc was that there was an entire chapter based on this character. Higuruma was a lawyer who like dedicated all of his energy in order to get justice for people, but like as his time and as being a lawyer, he essentially saw like so much injustice in the system that he was trying to like so desperately be a part of. His clients were always like wrongfully accused and wrongfully sentenced, and they'd always have this look of fear in their eyes, and they'd always direct that fear towards him, and he'd blame himself for not being able to ever save them. And it wouldn't just reflect on him, but it would also reflect on the justice system in general. Like the fact that like the system is so broken that like it let them down, and because he's a part of that system, he's also letting them down. And that all coalesced into him getting his curse technique and using said curse technique to kill the judges who wrongfully accused his client. And he's essentially been killing people ever since the beginning of the Culling game. He sees the laws of the Culling games as superior to the ones in reality because you can't break these rules. If you try to break them, you instantly die. There's absolutely no need for anyone to argue over what's wrong and what's right. So he's absolutely fascinated with this game, and he wants to play until he sees all of these consequences actually drawn out to their conclusion. This makes Itadori realize that if he's actually going to want to get Higuruma's points, he's gonna have to use force, and Higuruma is more than down to throw hands. Since Higuruma has so many points in the Culling game, Itadori just assumes that Higuruma is very dangerous, so he wants to play it safe, and the first thing he decides to do is just let Higuruma do the first move. He wants to see exactly what Higuruma is capable of, so he's just gonna just sit there and just wait for Higuruma to pull off the first move. Unfortunately, Higuruma's first move is pulling off a domain expansion. But as we all know from the Shibuya incident, Itadori is always quick in these type of situations. He immediately runs over to attack Higuruma, but is immediately stopped in mid-air in the middle of his attack, and he's teleported back over to the other side of the domain. It's then that Higuruma explains that neither of them are actually able to attack each other or harm each other within his domain. What happens next is actually one of the most interesting things we've ever seen from a domain expansion. Prior to this, every single time someone opened their domain, it was just a sure hit attack of their curse technique. If you ever got caught in one, it was basically just instant death, but this time the complete opposite is true. The entire fight comes to a grinding halt because he's forcing Itadori to just go through this entire court trial. And we actually do find out later that domains like this were actually normal back in the past until everyone got hung up on, you know, killing all their opponents in just one single hit. The Shikigami that controls the entire domain is named Judge-Man, and it accuses Itadori of entering a pachinko shop and essentially, you know, start gambling before the age of 18 about like over a year ago. Now Itadori only has one single chance in order to convince Judge-Man that he's not guilty, and he uses a very simple excuse that he only went into this gambling shop simply because he needed to go to the bathroom, and he didn't actually gamble. The only problem with that is that Higuruma has like actual photo evidence of Itadori going and exchanging his winnings. This actually causes Judge-Man to rule Itadori guilty, with the punishment being confiscation. That's when the domain instantly disappears and they begin the fight, and after taking a few blows from Higuruma's mallet, Itadori realizes what was actually confiscated. It was his cursed energy. But that's actually not the biggest inconvenience for Itadori because he's actually just built different. You see, the entire point of confiscation is actually to confiscate a curse user's curse technique. But since Itadori doesn't have a curse technique, Judge-Man just decided to just take away his cursed energy instead. And for anyone else, like, that just sounds horrible, but since Itadori is, like I said before, built different, and he has like almost like a very Maki style heavenly restriction on his body, like he's just so physically powerful that just doesn't even give him that big of a hindrance. So as he's looking for a weakness, he comes up with the idea that maybe his curse technique is actually just like a real court system. So he asks Higuruma for a retrial, and that actually works. They both get teleported right back into his domain, and it just starts an entirely new trial. Unfortunately, this time, the accusation isn't as small as underage gambling. This time, Judge-Man accuses Itadori of mass murder back in Shibuya. And to Higuruma's surprise, Itadori doesn't even try to deny this. He fully accepts the punishment that comes with it. He says, like, yes, I did it. I killed all those people. So Judge-Man naturally gives Itadori the death penalty. And in the next scene, we see that not only is Itadori's cursed energy gone, but this time Higuruma also has the Executioner's Sword, which basically means that if Higuruma just cuts Itadori with it just once, then Itadori is dead, no exceptions. And it's at this point that Higuruma genuinely just starts tweaking out entirely because he knows for a fact that Itadori was not at fault for what happened at Shibuya. But he sees that Itadori obviously has like a super guilty conscience, which almost makes Itadori seem not scummy. It makes him almost seem pure in the eyes of Higuruma. But that kind of breaks Higuruma's entire worldview because he inherently believes that everyone is just scummy, evil, and ugly, and just disgusting people because that's all he's ever seen in his profession. And even though this actually makes him want to kill Itadori more because Itadori's very existence is just breaking his worldview, he still hesitates because he's interested in Itadori. He wants to understand him a little bit more. And since he hesitates, Itadori just ends up finishing him with like one final blow. But Itadori isn't like stupid. He realizes that Higuruma just let him win the battle. So it's at that point that they actually finally decide to just start talking things out. Itadori explains that he genuinely thinks that the incident was his fault because he was weak. But Higuruma challenges him by saying that everyone is weak. It is simply just human nature to be weak, and being weak does not make you evil. And since Higuruma like basically sees that Itadori genuinely is a pretty pure-hearted kid, he decides to actually help him out. He gives him his points so that he can essentially use them so that no one else has to kill each other in the Culling games if they so desire. Like I said before with the rules in the video, the entire point of killing people is to gain points, because if you don't gain points within 19 days, your brain will get fried from curse technique removal, and now they made it so that they can just give each other points whenever they want without having to kill each other. And since people could just change their points willy-nilly, no one actually has to kill each other anymore. Itadori then asks if they can actually work together for the rest of the game, but Higuruma decides that he doesn't want to because he has a guilty conscience and he has a lot to think about. So after the game ends, he's essentially deciding to just go and turn himself into the police for just killing so many people, especially killing people before the game even started, which was the judges that basically falsely accused his client, which was the thing that sent him over the edge in the first place. And this genuinely made me sad because I actually really wanted to see more of this character, because he instantly just became like a fan favorite, like just from one appearance. And I just wanted to see way more of him, but I don't think we're gonna see any more of him in the game. But fortunately, we do see a little bit more in the future of him, so it's not too bad. Hopefully that cut's not too jarring. So we cut back to Megumi and Reggie, and Reggie's the guy that like basically confronted Megumi and tricked him into seeing him instead of Higuruma. And Reggie immediately backs down from fighting Megumi, specifically because he thinks that Megumi might actually be strong, and he doesn't want any of that smoke. So instead of fighting, he actually asks Megumi a few questions. He asks Megumi what he thinks the entire purpose of the Culling games is for. And Megumi explains like everything that Tengen told him, but Reggie like corrects him on the like actual purpose. He tells him that by the end of it, Kenjaku's probably going to do something to shake up the entire game, and is probably going to like eliminate a bunch of players en masse. So because Reggie doesn't want to be like eliminated and caught off guard by Kenjaku, he's assembling a bunch of strong sorcerers to be on a team to essentially stop Kenjaku if he ever decides to actually just drop this entire big bombshell on the Culling game. And he asks Megumi to be a part of that team because he seems pretty strong. And Megumi decides that he will be on the team on one condition, and that condition being that all of them are to give Megumi their points as soon as Itadori establishes the new rule. Reggie immediately disagrees with these terms, causing negotiations to fail and a huge fight to break out. So this one werewolf guy with claws tries to attack Megumi from behind, but Megumi does this whole whack-a-mole technique where he goes to the ground, pops back up, and he does like an entire reverse attitude adjustment to this guy off the roof. And then he has Naoya just finish off the job for him. Megumi gets distracted and he tells the girl that basically tricked him into this entire situation to never show her face again, as if the battle's already over. But Reggie goes and stabs one of his wolves and just lets him know that he's gonna have to fight to kill and that the battle's like nowhere near over. And his entire threat distracts Megumi just long enough for an eyeball to come falling from out of the sky and explode. He survives the blast, and we see that this guy named Hazanoki essentially is the one who threw the eyeball at him. We then see him rip out his own tooth before like splashing Megumi with gasoline. He then throws a tooth at her, causing that to explode, and it also catches Remy off, like the girl again who tricked Megumi. It catches her in the explosion, but Megumi saves her, specifically just to remind her that her own allies just don't care about her, and that's why one of the reasons why she should just leave them. And once he tells her this, she goes for a sneak attack that actually hits him, and he ends up getting poisoned. This obviously makes him feel pissed, but then we see from her perspective that like she has the entire Captain Save-A-Ho response, where she's like, okay, well, if you aren't gonna save me, then Reggie needs to save me, and if he's not gonna save me, then you can save me. I need someone to protect me. I need someone to take care of me. So like she doesn't want to be alone. She can't help herself. She needs specifically someone else to help her because she just doesn't have the confidence in herself. But like she's actually like kind of crazy, and since she is so crazy, Megumi just calls her scum, and he's so angry at her specifically because she basically relies on broken promises of other men rather than actually caring about their actions, because she basically is like, no, well, they promised to save me, and he's just like, well, they just try to kill you, so like use common sense. Right after that conversation, that's when Sabretooth gets back up, climbing up the building with his claws, and they confront each other. But him and Megumi don't fight because Kogain pops up to tell them that there's been a new rule change. And that rule change is basically that anyone can just switch points with each other, which essentially tells Megumi immediately that Itadori was successful in the mission and that he was able to get Higuruma and to use his points to help everyone, you know, not die. And since Megumi now knows that this part of the mission is successful, it gives him the inspiration to go and kick ass. He then uses Max Elephant to throw them both out of the room, and as the werewolf man is falling down, Megumi jumps onto him as they're falling, and he just starts stabbing him in the face profusely with his dagger. And the scene reminds me of when Toji did the same with his playful cloud against, I think his name was Dagon, that other cursed spirit that they fought back in Shibuya, which I thought it seems like a really cool callback. It felt like father like son type situation. Anyways, they both actually finally land. Megumi stabs him to death, and that's when Megumi gains 5 points for the game. Soon Hazanoki and Reggie do their best Mary Poppins impression. They just start flowing down on umbrellas, ready to take Megumi on a 2-on-1. Which is like really inconvenient because Megumi has already been caught in like explosions and he's been poisoned, so he's at an immediate disadvantage. But right when Hazanoki essentially throws another tooth at him to cause another explosion, that's when some random guy just comes in and just tanks the explosion with his face. And he essentially says that it's unfair that Megumi has to fight a 2-on-1 right now. He then tries to flex his power by saying that he took absolutely 0 damage from the attack, which is absolutely bizarre because everyone can obviously see him bleeding everywhere. The thing that actually makes this even more comical is the fact that every time we're introduced to a character, we get their name and number of points that basically tell us who they are and how dangerous they are. And this guy's name is Takaba, and he currently has 0 points, meaning that he's literally not a threat to anyone in the Culling game right now. Even Megumi, who was just now saved by Takaba, this random guy, can't even take him seriously from how bizarre and weird he actually is. And Takaba introduces himself to Megumi by telling him that he's 35 years old and he can essentially just tell who's evil and who's not evil just by looking at their face. And when he looks at Megumi's face, he could just say that, hey, he's probably just as evil as these other guys. I don't know why he introduced himself like this. It's just random. Everything he does is random. It's lol, super funny. I actually do find it amazingly hilarious, but it's still just bizarre to say the least. And Megumi is super obviously annoyed by this comedic sorcerer, but he decides to just ride things out because this guy did save Megumi's life. So he kind of has to trust him. He has no other choice unless he wants to get beat up by 2 guys and not have any help. Meanwhile, their opponents are super confused on who Takaba is, and they essentially ask, which one is he? And because of the phrasing of this question, Takaba assumes that he's asking if he's a funny comedian or a not funny comedian, when in reality, Hazanoki is asking him what era he's from, if he's from this era or a past era, but Takaba doesn't actually care and he just runs with the first assumption on answering on whether or not he's actually funny or not. So stupid. And Takaba answers the question by going into a full squatting position that has to be censored because of his tight costume. Okay, so this is editing me in the future. I was completely wrong about his suit being too tight. He's actually not wearing anything on his other side, which means it's not being censored because it's too tight. It's being censored because something's slipping out. So, yeah. He says that he wears the costume in order to pay homage to the first superhero to ever make him burst out in laughter. So when he's wearing the costume, he swears that he cannot make a joke that doesn't land. He then proceeds to tell one of those jokes, which is, "That's none of your business." That's it. That's the whole joke. There's no setup. It's just a punchline, and yeah. But to be fair, that's the English translation, so it was translated in a way that the English audience could understand. The joke he's actually saying is "Yoke no aswa," which means none of your business, but instead of using wa, he's saying Wi-Fi. And that's the entire joke. It's a better pun in Japanese, but it's still super lame. And of course, even with all the context, everyone thinks that the joke is dumb and no one laughs, but instead of blaming it on a bad joke, he instead blames it on the audience. He tells everyone that they're being a terrible audience for not laughing at the joke. And because they're being such a terrible audience, he essentially does one of the most beautiful drop kicks I've ever seen drawn on paper. And he just blasts Hazanoki off screen. This makes everyone realize just how strong the comedian sorcerer actually is. Megumi tells Takaba that they need to divide and conquer if they're gonna win. He assumes that Hazanoki's curse technique is ripping off his own body parts to make them explode and then using reverse curse technique to bring them back. And the comedian listens to every single word that Megumi is saying, while also completely ignoring his personal space. Megumi tells the comedian to make sure he takes their points before he kills them. But the comedian basically says, well, I'm not here to kill anyone because he doesn't want to do anything that would take away anyone else's smile. But it doesn't really matter because as long as he gets the job done, he gets the job done. As long as he gets the points, they're good. And after exchanging a few attacks, Takaba hits him with 1,000 years of death, and then they just go off screen fighting their own battle and leaves Megumi to fight Reggie on his own. Megumi attacks Reggie with Max Elephant and his rabbits, but Reggie pulls out a receipt that turns into a net and it captures all of them. And then afterwards he pulls out a bunch more receipts that just turn into knives that Megumi just barely blocks. We then figure out that Reggie's curse technique is actually contract object reproduction, which basically means that he can spawn any object or service just by burning a receipt. So for example, if he had a receipt for a car, then he could just throw the receipt and that receipt would just turn into a car and you'd just basically be throwing a car at someone. Or if he had a receipt for a 2-day spa treatment, then like if he burned it up, then it would basically make his body feel as if he just went to the spa and he'd be refreshed, which is something he actually does mid-battle. And since Reggie's now fully rested and Megumi's super tired, Megumi just decides to dip to some nearby gymnasium, but Reggie follows him on his new scooter and follows him along with a bunch of drones. He then throws a few trucks at him, he throws Perry the Pod plant at him, he throws a knife that's disguised as a radish, and it basically forces Megumi to say, fuck it, I've had enough of this go-go gadget ass bullshit power domain expansion. Reggie's immediate reaction is to use Hollow Wicker Basket, which is like an old school version of Simple Domain. So Reggie thinks that he's completely safe from Megumi's sure hit effect, but unfortunately for him, Megumi doesn't have a sure hit effect because he's using an incomplete domain. The only thing that his domain serves to accomplish is to make Megumi's stats just go to like 120% of his full potential. And the only reason he chose to fight in this gymnasium is so that he could have a closed space to use his domain for, and so that Reggie couldn't escape any of his attacks. Megumi uses his clones to start jumping Reggie, forcing Reggie to use like an insane plan to like use all of his cars and just throw them all into Megumi's shadow, because he realizes that Megumi has to carry the weight of whatever's in his shadow. And since Megumi doesn't have like, you know, actual super strength, this is super strenuous on his actual body. But Megumi comes up with like the same exact idea to actually fight off Reggie by dropping Max Elephant right on to Reggie's head. And at that point, it just becomes a battle of attrition to see who is going to be crushed by the weight of either the cars or this elephant first. And Reggie is the first one to actually go. And he actually only really loses the battle simply because he tried to use his other trump card, and since he used another hand, he just got way too greedy. And he falls deep down into Megumi's shadow, and he's basically just falling for an eternity, and he probably is going to drown under there. Until he actually gives a command to one of the cars that are already in Megumi's shadow. It drives him all the way back up, and it essentially like disappears right after the command, which also simultaneously lightens the load on Megumi's shadow. Reggie then pulls out one final trump card against Megumi, and it's a house. It's an actual giant fucking house that he just drops onto Megumi, causing Megumi to just say, you know what, fuck this shit, I'm out. He decides to turn off his domain, causing the house to crash through the floor, making them both fall through to the next floor. And on the next floor, there's like a pool they fall into, they both get out, and at this time, because Reggie's like all wet, and all his receipts are wet, that means he can't burn them up, which means Reggie no longer has any more of his like random bullshit power to pull out. At the same time, Megumi is also way too tired to really pull out any more of his shadows, so it completely resets the fight so that they just have to fight hand to hand now. And Reggie's like pretty confident right now because he doesn't think that Megumi has like anything else left up his sleeve because he's just so damaged, but he's wrong. A demon dog comes from behind and just like stabs him, and he thinks that the dog was gone for so long, and that's why, and it's because that Megumi was just too weak to do it, but Megumi was just waiting for the right time to pull this thing back out again. He then decides to give Megumi all of his points as one last good deed before he dies. The only thing that he asks in return for Megumi is to let fate toy with him, become a clown, and then die. Hopefully that doesn't foreshadow anything. Meanwhile, we cut over to the comedian's fight, which is also wrapping up at the same exact time, basically. Hazunoki essentially gets a message from Kogain after like it pops up to tell him that his leader died, Reggie's dead because of Megumi, and that basically means that the fight is basically over, so he decides to just stop fighting Takaba. And that's because Takaba's ability is just way too annoying, and it just makes the entire fight bullshit, so like there's no point in getting himself killed over this, or even if he wanted to win, like it's just going to be way too hard for him to do it because, again, Takaba is just really confusing. He's a really bullshit character, and no one wants to deal with him. And it's here that we finally figure out what Takaba's ability is. It's the comedian technique, which allows him to turn scenarios that he finds funny into reality. It's an ability that would be actually effective against someone like Gojo, meaning that like if he just found it funny, then he could just bypass Infinity and just kill him. The only downside to this extremely OP ability is the fact that Takaba himself has no idea that's his ability. Like he doesn't even know that he has an ability really. But I guess that could be a good thing because if he actually knew, then he'd be self-aware about all of his jokes and it might like affect his humor. We then cut over to Remy and we see that she's running away while we also get to see her perspective on men. Even though she always hears them referred to as wolves, she still likes them because all men just seem to take care of her. And the thing is, like, she's just so not prepared for life. Like she doesn't like being an adult. She doesn't like any of the stress that comes with it, any of the problems that come with it. So when a man comes in and says that they're just gonna take care of her, she immediately just jumps right into their arms and she's like, please, I'll do literally anything, just be my knight in shining armor. And since she thinks of men as wolves and she wants these wolves to save her, it's really ironic that Megumi's wolf comes to kill her. But Megumi stops his wolf before he actually can kill her because it's not what his sister would have actually wanted. He then passes out because of all the blood loss and the poison in the middle of an alley, but luckily enough for him, he's saved by a literal angel. The same angel that they're actually looking for to help them break Gojo out of the prison realm. And we have to leave his fate up to cliffhanger because we need to switch immediately to a different colony. So we switch to the Sendai Colony and we see that everything's basically at a standstill, specifically because the 4 strongest are like all too scared to actually fight each other because like, again, they're like the 4 top strongest. If they clashed, then like, you know, everyone might die, or either if they do fight, the fight might go on forever. And this deadlock ends because Yuta Okotsu enters the colony, and one of the first things he does is kill one of these 4 strongest. And now that this prodigy has come in to shake things up entirely, this colony now enters the endgame. As soon as Yuta kills Druv, we see that Druv's Shikigami that was like super giant that everyone could see across the colony just disappears, which tells everyone that he just died. So of course everyone goes and asks Kogain, who essentially gained points within the last like couple of minutes. Meanwhile, Yuta is leading an entire group of civilians to safety, and he believes that since he just now killed one of the 4 strongest in the colony, that means no one's actually going to want to come to that area for a while. But he's entirely mistaken because immediately afterwards, a swarm of like these large cursed energy infused cockroaches just swarm towards all the civilians trying to kill him. This forces all of them to go to this nearby stadium where Rika destroys the entrance so that nothing can actually get in to harm any of them. Once Yuta takes care of all the cockroaches, that's when he sees one giant cursed spirit cockroach just like standing there menacingly, and he realizes that this thing's like way too strong to be left alive. And it's mainly because of the fact that he assumes that eventually, since everyone can make their own rules in the games whenever they want, that it means that eventually someone's going to make a rule to allow everyone to exit the Culling game. And if this thing is like left alive when someone makes that rule, then it's just going to go out and just kill a bunch of civilians who aren't even a part of the game. So the fight starts out with this roach trying to swing its blade at Yuta, but Yuta cuts off his arm, stabs the arm into the ground with his sword, turning this entire fight into a fist fight now. Then he starts wailing on him, he throws railings at him and stuff, but then he finally picks up his sword and he tries to finish him off with said sword, but that's when the cockroach spirit essentially just blocks the attack. And it's at this point that Yuta realizes that he could probably beat this thing fairly easily, but he wants to hold back because he doesn't want to use reverse curse technique, and he doesn't want to pull out Rika just in case anyone's actually watching the battle because he doesn't want to show his full hand yet. Then the roach spirit pulls out some Shikigami that, if I'm being completely honest with you, it's the most vile character design for like monsters I've ever seen. I don't even know if I'm allowed to show this on YouTube. That's when they attack him with another swarm of roaches, but he's able to take them all out, but not before like taking this goo or blood into his eyes, forcing him to not be able to see an incoming attack that comes from behind him. But luckily, Yuta is still able to block it, but the sword that this roach has shoots out these little tiny Shikigami eggs that burrow into Yuta's shoulder and like rip out like hatched eggs, causing him to like be vulnerable for another fatal attack. Once the curse thinks that it actually beat Yuta, it goes to try to devour him, but Yuta essentially gets up, grabs it by its face, and gives it the most romantic kiss that would make even Maki jealous, and then blows like a shit ton of positive cursed energy into its head, making its brain like blow up from the inside out. This show of power basically gets everyone's attention, so he gets no break after this fight, and Uro comes immediately to confront him, and she has the power to manipulate the sky. She bends space, forcing him to go crashing through town, and when he tries to go in for like an attack and punch her, she uses she literally bends the fabric of reality as if it's actual fabric so that his punch just bends instead of actually hitting her. And that's when she goes in for a counterattack that actually works on him. Yuta wants a chance to try to understand her ability, so he kind of pauses the battle a little bit just to have a conversation with her. He asks her why she's risking her life to fight him in this current moment when, like, she's strong enough to fight off any weakling in the Culling game. She answers saying that this is her second chance at life, so she actually wants to get out there and fight. Also, she wants to collect as many points as possible, just in case Kenjaku has other plans for the Culling game. Yuta then asks why she's killing people for her own sake and not anyone else's sake, and he just genuinely cannot wrap his mind around that. It's at this point that Uro realizes that Yuta's a part of the Fujiwara clan, and this pisses her off. And I'm gonna be really honest for a second, I hate this conversation. I think it's super messy, I think it comes out of absolutely nowhere, and I understand the point of it, because the entire point is to show that Yuta is a really great guy and he's self-sacrificing and he'll always help out his friends. Like, everything he does is for the sake of his friends. And when he sees someone who is just fighting for themselves, he's like, whoa, I don't like any of that. It's just to remind us that Yuta's a good person. But I just don't think that this conversation was the best way of conveying that, and I'm gonna go into that a little bit later. I'm just glad that it ends very quickly because we have a new contender coming into the battle to completely stop the conversation. And that's Ishigori. Ishigori fires this massive blast of curse energy right at Yuta, and it like destroys multiple city blocks, but Yuta just tanks it. It's at this point that the battle turns into a triple threat match. Yuta immediately rushes towards Ishigori, and he's forced to dodge and weave past all of his attacks. But soon enough, Yuta actually closes the gap and he asks for a short-range battle. This immediately causes Ishigori to go on this entire rant about how that's just not fun for him, and his entire life that he's had like plenty of fun, but he's never been fully satisfied. Then he immediately just starts wailing on Yuta, and he blasts Yuta onto another building. And that's when he uses one of his ultimate attacks, which is called Granite Blast, and he just shoots it at Yuta, but Yuta just blocks it with his hand, like an absolute boss. And then Yuta goes for a counterattack and punches him into a crater. This actually gets Ishigori super turned up, and which makes him blast Yuta into Yoro, and then that's when she uses Thin Ice Missile to just like blast him into like this glass dome, and it essentially puts him out of commission for a little bit. Ishigori gets pissed off because he does not want to share this battle with her, so he shoots at her, but she uses her curse technique to redirect his blast right back at him. And for the first time, he eats his own curse technique and he's not a fan of it. Yuta finally gets up looking super injured while healing himself with reverse curse technique, and everyone thinks that he's probably at his limit right now, but that couldn't be further from the truth, because the only reason he's not actually fighting at full power is because he wanted Rika to go and protect all the civilians from the battle. But he's realizing now that he needs her in order for him to go all out. So that's when he puts on his ring and he summons a fully manifested Rika. And this actually throws everyone off because now he has way more power than he started off the battle with. And also at the same time, we the audience learn exactly what Yuta's curse technique actually is, since it's been left like ambiguous this entire time. At the end of JJK 0, we see that Rika's curse was broken that was keeping her as a vengeful spirit. And even though her spirit was fully able to pass on, she decided to leave Yuta a little gift before she left. And that gift was just a perfect copy of her. The only downside to this gift is the fact that since he did break the curse, he lost all of his curse energy and he had to start over from scratch. Like, he had to start his training all the way from the beginning to get to the same amount of power that he was at the end of that movie. Luckily for him, he's a prodigy, so it only took him 3 months to actually reach full power again. When Yuta is connected to this version of Rika through that ring, he's essentially able to use his curse techniques, he's able to fully manifest Rika, and he's able to use all of her curse energy as his own. And this entire state lasts for about 5 minutes, so he has to finish this battle quickly. Rika rips open her own chest in order to show us that she has like a bunch of cursed tools and objects just hidden within them. And she lets Yuta choose whatever weapons he wants from this battle. And he decides to choose these gauntlets. And after Yuta's ready to fight again, that's when he sends Rika at Yoro. And Yoro thinks that she's actually ready for this fight until we see that Yuta pulls out Inamaki's curse technique. He has the fang tattoos from Cursed Speech on his face, and he essentially yells, "Don't move," allowing him and Rika to pull off one of the most devious jumpings I've ever seen in this series. Ishigori gets really angry about the fact that he's not a part of the battle anymore, so he shoots a beam at Rika, and she gets super angry because it actually hurts, so she goes and wrecks his shit, and that essentially starts a 1v1 between them for a while. Meanwhile, Yuta plucks a few hairs out of his head to turn into Shikigami. And those Shikigami essentially go to Uro, and they just start swarming and attacking her with this like small domain expansion type technique, which makes her realize that that's Druv's technique. And since she knows that's Druv's technique, the guy that Yuta killed all before this, she realizes that Yuta's ability must be to copy. They then get into another conversation about their bloodlines, but Ishigori doesn't want to hear all that and decides to kick things up to the next level. And at the same exact time, all three of them pull out their domain expansions. And this causes an entire series of events to make the battle going forward just spiral out of control. First, Rika sees that Yuta is being trapped in the domain, and she decides not to do anything because she's way too far away to stop it. But the love that the original Rika has for Yuta simply just won't allow you to be trapped in a dangerous situation like this. So that very love forces this version of Rika to power up to an entirely new level, like even stronger than what she was when they fought Geto back in JJK 0. But at the same exact time, the cockroach spirit essentially comes back to life by reproducing asexually and putting its spirit into its children. Also at the same time, the three-way domain shatters and breaks apart because all of their domain expansions are just so much different from each other that it can't maintain its shape. And this is an extreme hindrance to everyone because after you use a domain expansion, you can't use your curse technique properly. Yuta kicks Zero into the roaches, forcing the cursed spirit to inject its babies into her arm, forcing that to just blow off. And immediately afterwards, Rika eats said arm that blows off. And since Ishigori is completely tired of everyone getting in his way, he uses Granite Blast to take out Uro while also destroying the Cursed Spirit's arm. And then Yuta follows up by putting his hand over the Cursed Spirit's face and then just using reverse curse technique to just blow its head off. And this leaves Yuta and Ishigori as the last two standing. Ishigori starts charging up for a really big Granite Blast, forcing Yuta to realize that if he actually wants to win the battle right now, then he has to basically charge up his own energy and just use one final big attack against Ishigori before he can actually let off said blast. But before he can do that, Yuta takes one good look at Ishigori, and he gets rizzed up so bad to the point where he's like, you know what, I want to make Ishigori happy. Just this once, I'll just do a clash with him instead, and we're just gonna clash with our cursed energy. So they go head to head in a beam clash, and of course Yuta loses because Ishigori's cursed energy output is just way higher than Yuta's. Ishigori wants to go again until one of them dies, but this time Yuta has sense and he has Rika shoot the blast instead, while Yuta himself goes and attacks from another angle. However, Ishigori is able to block Rika's blast with his own hand just like Yuta did before. And once Yuta gets close to him, Ishigori tries to pull off a Granite Blast point blank right in Yuta's face. But Yuta uses his copy ability in order to copy Uro's ability, and he basically warps reality so that the Granite Blast just warps up into the sky instead of actually hitting Yuta in the face. And then he hits Ishigori with a point blank thin ice missile, and then right afterwards warps Rika over to their location so that she can just punch him straight in the skull. Unfortunately for Yuta, this is the point in the battle where 5 minutes had elapsed, so he lost access to his curse technique. Ishigori punches Rika and basically decks her out of existence. So now the fight just turns into an actual one-on-one, and they go all out using hand-to-hand combat. But Yuta still has one more trick up his sleeve. He gets Ishigori into the right spot, holds him down, and then waits for the laser to come crashing right down Ishigori that he threw up into the battle earlier, and it completely cooks him. This causes Ishigori to lose all steam, and he essentially falls down, but not before thanking Yuta for a good battle. In the end, Yuta chills out to have a conversation with everyone, and he specifically leaves them all alive just so that he can ask them for their points. And since they lost and he just left them alive, they say, yeah, screw it, yeah, you can have our points. So Yuta got exactly what he wanted, and he just walks off into the sunset. Oh yeah, Miwa is here too, but no more information on that, I guess. And that's basically the end of the Sendai Colony. But I also wanted to go over my thoughts relatively early when it comes to this section. First off, this entire battle is probably my second favorite battle within the entire Culling games because it feels like how I thought the game would fully be. You know, it felt like what it intended to be from the fact that it was an actual battle royal. This fight is like the first time in a long time that we get to see Yuta go all out, while using some familiar tricks that we've seen before, but to even a greater extent. Yuta is genuinely the MVP of this entire game, specifically of how much his entire presence just shook up everything. It kind of reminds me of Gojo, how Gojo's birth shook up the entire Jujutsu world, making curses even stronger just to keep up. That's what it felt like when Yuta entered the Sendai Colony, because everything changed as soon as he entered the game. When Yuta first enters the Culling game, he decides that he wants to take the entire weight of the world on his shoulders. He understands that everyone who was there for the Shibuya incident has basically taken a lifetime worth of trauma and still haven't gotten over it yet. Yuta currently is probably the second strongest character in the entire series. Basically right under Gojo. So if he was there during the Shibuya incident, he probably would have been able to save a lot of lives. Might have been able to help Inamaki from losing an arm, or Maki from being burnt alive, or probably been able to save Gojo so that none of this would have even happened in the first place. If he was there would have been a chance that he would have been able to save everyone. And that's been his goal ever since JJK0, to save all of the people that gave him a home. He alone wants to get the 400 points so that no one else has to go through the stress of collecting them. He alone wants to kill Kenjaku and save Gojo so that no one else has to go through that battle. And I completely love that entire mindset because it's like a shonen protagonist level mindset right there, and it's so fitting considering the fact that Yuta was the first main character of the series before Yuji. And I can't really talk about this fight without speaking on Yuta's competition. We have Ishigori and Uro, who basically have the most standout character designs and personalities out of all the side characters in the Culling game. Uro using her curse technique in order to clothe herself is one of the most sickest things I've ever seen for a character design, and Ishigori's pompadour actually helps to steal the show whenever you see him in any panel. And although I think that these are super creative designs, I do think that they lean on the side of too cartoonish and almost a little too gimmicky. There's this single double page spread, this color page that has Ishigori and Uro looking very different, where Uro is wearing clothes and Ishigori simply just looks normal. And I genuinely love these character designs, and it makes me kind of wish that like we'd see them past the Culling games, like to a point where they're more mellowed out and maybe they join the good guys and they just like, this is just how they look afterwards, as if like this is just them developing more into like normal society. So let me actually say something that I didn't like about them, particularly Uro or Euro. I think it's Uro. I don't know. You guys can. I've been saying it for a long time, so you guys in the comments tell me if I'm saying it wrong. I'm just gonna stick with Uro. I don't like Uro as a character, or at the very least, I don't think I like her motivations because they're just super unclear. And it's not because they aren't like fully explained, but it's because I just don't care. And that might sound like a horrible take, but the thing is, the reason for why I don't care is because Yuta does not care. She goes on to explain that she used to be the captain of the Sun, Moon, and Star Squad, which was affiliated to the Fujiwara clan. But the Fujiwara clan essentially sacrificed her and basically betrayed her, which is why she hates them. And since Yuta is a descendant of the Fujiwara clan, she hates Yuta. And whenever she brings this up to him, he just flat out ignores her. He'll space out and just completely derail the conversation and just talk at her saying that she's weak because she doesn't like love anyone, that everything she's doing is wrong because she simply fights for herself rather than of course fighting for someone else like he does. And she gets incredibly thrown off and annoyed by this whenever he starts going on about this. And I'm not gonna lie, I felt the same exact way. Like, what the hell is Yuta actually talking about? She's sitting here trying to add depth and history to the world while also adding to her own character arc. And every time she speaks, Yuta completely derails it. And why exactly is this? What is the point of making Uro a super important character in this fight if Gege, the writer, is not going to dive into what makes her important? Is it because Gege believes that Yuta has something more important to say? Well, apparently, because he just continuously just keeps going on about how love beats everything, how love always triumphs everything, about how love makes him strong and that she can't be strong because she doesn't love anything. But Yuta, like, what exactly is she supposed to do? Who is she supposed to love? She died in the past and got reincarnated in the future to fight in a battle to the death. Who in the Culling games has anyone else to love? I think it would have made a little bit more sense if Yuta was supposed to fill that role for her, because it did seem like there was supposed to be like this weird, confusing romantic tension between them, because at the end of the battle, Ishigori does call what they basically are and like the entire arguments that they're having a lover's spout, and Yuta like agrees, saying like, oh, it kind of is like that. But I don't know if that was like more of like a joke or if there was supposed to be something more to it, because these two characters, their relationship isn't all that developed, because again, Yuta always derails it and he never brings it anywhere. It seemed like Gege just wanted another chance to reiterate the fact that Yuta's sole driving force is love. But I completely hate that because that was already established back in JJK0. So the fact that he's doing it here now just overshadows the entire character of Uro. And it would have made more sense if Uro represented hate. Like if her whole entire thing is, oh, hate makes me stronger, I hate everything, that would have made more sense, because that would have made her a natural foil to Yuta. But that's not what she's about. That's why she was so confused every single time Yuta talked at her and tried to teach her this lesson, because it was so random. No one in this battle represented that natural foil for Yuta. So personally, I feel like this conversation could have been halted for another time. Like, for starters, if he would have fought like Sukuna later on in the series and then given this entire spiel of love is superior and love is great to someone like Sukuna, who his whole thing is like hate, that would have made like way more sense. And I don't know why he specifically directed this entire rant to Uro when Ishigori was right there. And he was a pretty selfish guy too. And they had like an entirely different dynamic. You see, Ishigori's whole shtick is that he's never been satisfied throughout his life. He's had plenty of good battles, but he's never been full, quote unquote. It's the entire reason why he decides to come back in the Culling game so he could have a fulfilling battle. And luckily for him, he finds Yuta, like probably the second or third strongest sorcerer alive. And Yuta is able to actually fulfill him, actually give him a satisfying battle. Which is one of the reasons for why whenever anyone else interrupts the battle, he gets furious, because it feels like they're trying to steal his metaphorical meal. Yuta fully understood Ishigori, and when he had a chance to actually beat Ishigori in battle in a very easy way, he decided to hold off from winning, simply because Yuta wanted to give Ishigori the fight that he'd always been looking for. He wanted to give him a satisfying meal. And I actually really like that caring characterization that they were doing with him rather than whatever the hell they were trying to do with Yoro. But I think it's time for us to move away from this section of the arc so we can move on into the next section, which is all about Hakari. We're introduced to a young French mangaka by the name of Charles Bernard. He's showing his newest manga to an agent or editor at Shueisha, and this guy is just tearing into it. Not like particularly in a bad way, but he's giving a lot of constructive critiques towards it. Like how the plot is confusing and that the genre is really unclear, and his final critique is the fact that the perspective on his hands aren't drawn right, they're just not realistic. And to retaliate, Charles then takes this guy's hand and he breaks one of his fingers, bending it completely out of place to show that a finger can bend in that way in reality. It's then at this point that we figure out that Charles is actually a Culling game player, which, you know, explains why he's fucking insane. It's then that we also figure out that he's been telling this entire story to Hakari the entire time as they've been circling around on this Ferris wheel. He explains how ever since the Culling game started that no one's actually like selling manga anymore. Like no one wants to read manga anymore because of the crisis that happened after Shibuya. And this makes Charles kind of lose hope simply because creating mangas is his passion. So he asks Hakari to give him a reason to fight, like an actual reason to kill him so that he can stay alive and not succumb to curse technique burnout. Since of course, again, he lost all hope in life. And in return, Hakari answers him by saying that he wouldn't read any of his mangas even if he begged him to because of how depressing he is. This makes Charles cry, and then he initiates a battle to the death against Hakari for saying something so cruel to him. Charles starts off the battle by pulling out his sacred treasure, which is basically like this giant ink pen that also functions as a spear. He tries to hit Hakari with it, but Hakari is way too fast for him, but eventually Charles is able to actually graze him on the cheek, which activates his curse technique. And his curse technique puts this comic panel in the center of Hakari's chest that shows 1 second into the future. This is actually super lucky for Charles because as soon as Hakari starts trying in the battle, Charles can hardly keep up with Hakari's speed, even with the 1 second foresight. The thing that's unlucky about this curse technique is the fact that Hakari simply just starts blitzing him from different angles and blind spots so that Charles can't see into the future, because the entire point is that he needs to look at Hakari's chest in order to see 1 second into the future. So if Hakari is always attacking him from behind, then he just can't see into the future. Soon enough, Charles actually gets another lucky hit in on Hakari, and this actually makes it so that now he can see 2 seconds in the future. But Hakari, however, does not care for this entire shtick anymore, so instead he just decides to use his own big technique, domain expansion, idle death gamble. The first thing that this domain does is just throw a shit ton of rules in Charles's brain. It gives him a cast of irrelevant characters and their personalities that he has to follow, while also giving him all the basic rules of a pachinko machine, but it converts it into like a real life scenario as if he's living the story that's a part of the machine in real life. All these rules become way too much for Charles to comprehend, and I'm gonna be completely honest with you. I myself don't fully understand this domain. I don't fully understand the win condition and how to get up to that point, and I'm not gonna pretend like I do. All you need to know for this chapter is that Charles tries really hard to make sure that Hakari does not get a jackpot. But since Hakari is apparently the most luckiest sorcerer in Jujutsu Kaisen, he still hits it and it ensures his victory against Charles. But we cut away from that for a bit to see what Panda's doing. And he's just chilling there pretending to be a teddy bear because he's too scared to fight in that area alone. When him and Hakari went through the barrier, they got separated just like Itadori and Megumi did before. And since they're separated, Panda's all alone and he knows he's in the same area that the really strong Culling Games player is lurking, which is Kashimo. Soon he decides to man up and he actually just decides to go out and explore. And as soon as he does explore, he comes face to face with Kashimo, the guy with the most points in the game. Panda tries fooling Kashimo by acting like an actual literal panda, but Kashimo doesn't get fooled because he simply just asks Kogain if Panda is another player in the Culling game. And of course, Kogain says yes. And since Kogain said yes, that's when Kashimo basically just starts thrashing Panda with his insane speed, strength, and curse-diffused attacks that basically feel like electricity. So Panda goes into beast mode in order to boost his strength, but even that doesn't actually work because Kashimo just ends up ripping off Panda's arm while calling him super weak. And since the entire 8 part of his form isn't working, that's when he decides to rely on his sister, which turns him into like this partially sexy rhinoceros lady, which I actually got super hyped for because we never saw his form before, but it kind of amounts to nothing because Kashimo just kind of obliterates her with his curse energy. He shoots like this lightning at her that's like almost as fast as like a domain sure hit effect. And before we can see the full extent of the damage, that's when we get this flashback to when Panda was a child, or it could be right now in the present, but in the confines of his mind. I'm not sure how it entirely works right now. But we see him with his brother, who is like this monkey that's bullying him. And his sister, his rhino sister, has to come over and stop his brother from bullying Panda, even though the brother says that they're just playing, because he is kind of bullying him like any other big brother would bully their younger sibling. We then see another moment where Panda's getting bullied by some other animals and his brother just sits there and watches. And then later he tells Panda that he's dumb for letting the bullies manipulate him into throwing his ball into the river, since that ball was a present from him from Santa. And then later the rhino sister tells the ape that he should have protected Panda, but his entire argument is that Panda's like super annoying because he's always crying and he's so clingy. But the rhino says that it's only because he has so much love in his heart. This actually does make the ape feel guilty, so he does decide to go and buy Panda a new ball with the rest of his allowance. And he plans to give it to Panda the next day, but he can't because his father comes in, takes him and his sister, and leaves, saying that they're leaving Panda forever. And the ape gets super frantic, saying that Panda is too weak and that he won't survive without them. But then they realize that they can't survive without Panda. They're the ones relying on Panda's strength. And Panda's the one who's discarding them in order to survive. And in the end, they sacrifice their souls for his, as we see him just torn to shreds, laying in his own blood and stuffing. So Kashimo decides to once again question Panda about the whereabouts of Sukuna, but Panda doesn't answer. So Kashimo just decides to finish him once and for all. Until Hakari comes crashing down into the battlefield with music blasting and his cursed energy at an all-time high. He punches Kashimo through like hella shipping containers and then almost grazes him with a dropkick. Kashimo wonders why his electric cursed energy isn't affecting Hakari, but then he realizes that it's because Hakari's cursed energy is just so large, like the output is just so much that it's just ignoring the electricity. And that, mixed with the fact that there's this music just randomly playing in the background, makes Kashimo extremely fascinated with the entire situation. They then finally introduce themselves to each other, and they make a bet. Hakari says that if he wins, then Kashimo has to give him his points, and Kashimo says if that Kashimo wins, then that means Hakari needs to tell him about the whereabouts of Sukuna. After Hakari gets high off of his own cursed energy bonus, that's when Kashimo attacks and he gets angry at Hakari for not having his head in the fight. But soon Hakari locks in and he knocks Kashimo across the entire shipping yard with blinding speed. After exchanging a few blows, that's when Kashimo charges up and shoots his lightning straight at Hakari's left arm, blowing it off completely. And Kashimo thinks that since he just now blew off Hakari's fucking arm, that means the fight's basically in the bag for him. But that couldn't be further from the truth, because Hakari just ignores it. He doesn't feel any pain, and he counters the immediate next attack that Kashimo hits at him. And after he blocks, that's when he just regrows his arm instantly and just decks Kashimo right in the snaz. And it's at that point Kashimo assumes that Hakari just knows reverse curse technique, but then the narrator confirms that he doesn't. He never learned reverse curse technique. But since Hakari currently has an unlimited, infinite amount of curse energy, it's essentially making it so his body instinctively knows to just regrow his arm back with reverse curse technique. It's just doing everything in its power to make sure that his body doesn't break down. In other words, Hakari is essentially immortal for the 4 minutes and 11 seconds that his jackpot is activated for. After that, the music soon stops and his curse energy just drops along with it. And it's at this point that we're led to believe that his technique ended. Until, of course, he just pulls out his domain expansion again, which tells us that as long as he hits a jackpot, he can just do it over and over again without any stress on his body. Once Kashimo gets stuck in the domain, he immediately understands how the domain actually works. And he figures that at this point, Hakari shouldn't be immortal. And this sets an entirely new battle that keeps resetting for reasons that I don't fully understand. But all I want to say about it is that the setting looks spectacular, so I just genuinely cannot wait for this to be animated. Like, I just can't wait to see what Mappa does with this battle. I'm pretty sure it'll be explained way more visually of what's happening here, just because everything just looks so visually, like, amazing. Like, there's just so much happening on screen. Anyways, Hakari actually finally hits a jackpot, but this time it lands on an even number, so his increased probability is just gone now. Which basically means that if Hakari tries to use his domain expansion again to hit another jackpot, it won't be nearly as fast as it was last time. Which also means that if Kashimo could just last the 4 minutes, 11 seconds, like if he just runs away and doesn't get hit, and he just survives that entire time, then he could just easily kill Hakari after the jackpot ends because he won't be immortal anymore. Or at least that would be his plan if he was a fucking loser. You see, back in the day, Kashimo was the strongest in an era filled with weaklings, which is one of the reasons for why he even chose to participate in the Culling game, because he wanted to be reincarnated in a time where Sukuna was alive. And since Kashimo has that dog in him, He's absolutely elated to fight him while he's immortal. It doesn't matter if Hakari can't die right now, Kashimo will figure it out because he's just that guy. Oh, and a quick note, the next chapter has Hakari's theme song, which is called Admiring You, and it seems like a very wholesome and corny, cute kind of song. And the only reason I'm bringing it up right now is simply just because like the whole entire internet has basically decided that Hakari's theme song is like this exciting funk music, and I think that when the anime comes out, the song's gonna be completely different and everyone's gonna be super disappointed, and I find that hilarious. Okay, let's move on. So Hakari and Kashimo are playing this riveting game of tag, but Hakari gets lazy, so he just decides to just punch an entire shipping container at Kashimo. But of course, Kashimo is no bitch, so he just punches it right back and they play a game of patty cake with it. They do that until Kashimo gets bored, rips the door off the hinges, and decides to slam it right into Hakari's face, basically ripping all the skin off. He specifically does this because it doesn't matter how good a sorcerer is with reverse curse technique. If you take out their head, then like they're dead because their brain controls the flow of curse energy. So Kashimo just aims his lightning right at Hakari's head, and instead of blowing it up, he somehow takes the curse energy and just blows it out of his nose. And Hakari actually admits that he genuinely almost died there, but this only like fires him up for the rest of the battle. At this point, Hakari only has 8 seconds left for his jackpot to be activated, so he just becomes completely reckless trying to take down Kashimo. And because he's being so reckless, he doesn't realize that Kashimo gathered electricity from his cursed tool that just blows straight through his guts. And at the same exact time, Hakari's immortality runs out and he falls to the ground defeated.
Or at least that's what I would say if Hakari was a fucking bitch.
Hakari immediately pulls out another domain expansion, but Kashimo thinks he's safe because he doesn't have the increased probability anymore, so he shouldn't be able to land another jackpot in time. He's like literally bleeding out, he only has seconds left. But Kashimo is wrong with this assessment because before Hakari's body can even fall to the floor, he hits another jackpot, and this forces his body to heal completely. After that, he pulls a pro gamer move by moving his domain over the water and dropping Kashimo into it. And this is bad for Kashimo because his curse energy is basically just like electricity, so if he lands in it, then it's going to constantly leak out until he basically runs out of curse energy completely. But if he cuts off his curse energy before he lands in the water, then that means he'll be at a complete disadvantage in this fight. So instead, Kashimo just chooses to surf on some cursed spirit fishes. And Hakari does the exact same thing, and they go fighting from fish to fish until he's finally able to kick Kashimo into the water. And that's when Hakari just simply waits for Kashimo to run out of curse energy. But the only problem with that is that Kashimo doesn't turn off his curse energy. He lets it all rip into the water, and the water mixes with the electricity, burning it basically, creating this chlorine gas that makes Hakari dizzy and pass out until he just falls into the water. And when you're poisoned, it's hard to use reverse curse technique in order to cure it because you have to directly know and find the exact cause of what's poisoning you within your bloodstream. You need to be incredibly skilled in order to actually get poison out of your body with reverse curse technique. And because his reverse curse technique is fully automated right now, it just decides to just do all the work for him and push all the poison out of his blood immediately. So it just gets back up with no problems. And it's at this point that he only has 5 seconds left until his jackpot immortality runs out, so the thought crosses his mind that he should just exit the water so he doesn't get fried and die. But he thinks about it for a second, and he just says, nah, I'd win. So he just goes up to him like a genie, just starts fighting anyway, regardless of the time limit that he has. Unfortunately for him, Kashimo decides to use the rest of his cursed energy up in order to create a massive electric explosion to blow up Hakari. And once Kashimo exits the water thinking that he won, he's surprised because he sees Hakari standing there with only one arm, and he just punches him with the arm he has left, completely knocking the fight out of Kashimo. You see, Hakari used a binding vow to basically allow the explosion to only blow up his arm rather than to blow up the rest of his body. And because he used that entire sacrifice play, it means that he's still alive now. And Kashimo completely respects that move. He respects the dog in him, he respects that he's such a gangster, and he's like, you know what, you win this battle, just kill me now. But Hakari has other plans for him. Hakari asks Kashimo to actually be a part of his team, and in return, he'll essentially let him fight Sukuna one-on-one. Hakari then goes and checks on Charles, the mangaka, to see how he's doing, because now they're just friends, which is cool. But in the middle of their conversation, the Temu version of Kiki the Witch basically comes over to tell Hakari that plans have changed, and that they no longer need to use their points to create communications between different colonies in the Culling game. And it's mainly because Maki has turned into a complete monster. More on that later. First, I want to talk about Hakari. Hakari has this really bad reputation within the context of the series because everyone who ever talks about him talks very negatively about him. Like, he's normally just referred to as like that one big jerk who just dropped out of Jujutsu High. But in reality, I think he's just unbearably misunderstood by his peers. And this of course shows a lot during his fight against Charles, the mangaka. He's a struggling artist who just can't sell any of his art. I feel like anyone who's been in a creative venture like that can relate. He's a dude who's just obsessed with manga, and so that's what he dedicates his life towards. But no one wants to buy any of it because he's just way too new. He's way too much of a novice and he makes way too many mistakes. Now, I can't draw or anything, but I am a storyteller. I've self-published a novel, and in the process of self-publishing a novel, I've had editors after editors basically critique my work and just say a lot of bad things about it. And these are all critiques that tried to help me make a better product. And even though, of course, it was all constructive and like I said, it helped to make a better product, in the beginning, it was still hard to hear. It genuinely hurt to hear. It made me feel lesser, like I wasn't good enough to make this important piece of cultural media. And I get those same exact vibes from Charles. The one difference between me and Charles is the fact that when Charles gets constructive criticism, he ends up breaking the critique's fingers. He is the absolute worst version of an artist. He believes himself to be the best, and whenever he gets constructive criticism, he genuinely can't take it because he believes he is the best, even though he's literally never been published. This is something that Hakari literally beats the shit out of him for after hearing, because it's complete nonsense. And after getting beat up by Hakari for this, that's when Charles actually has the realization that, oh, maybe Hakari has a point. Maybe I actually am being a big baby and I need to practice a little bit more. Hakari shows that he cares about people in a very different way from others. While you have people like Itadori who will go to crazy people and talk to them about their problems and try to walk them through everything to see the light, or people like Yuki who will just go to someone who's on the brink and will turn them into literally Jujutsu Hitler, Hakari's super different. He takes an entirely different stance on helping people, and his stance is simply just having a fight to the death with them. And it's not because he's insane. Well, okay, he's obviously insane, a little bit insane. All JJK characters are kind of insane. But it's not just because he's insane, but it's simply just because he believes that actions speak louder than words. Sometimes you can't fully come to a conclusion with just words alone. And this is actually like pretty on brand for Hakari, because his entire fixation is simply based around passion. And personally, I believe that the best way to see someone's passion is doing that physically, which is something that Hakari loves doing by continuously throwing hands with everyone. He comes off like an ass, but he's genuinely always trying to help people, like how he makes fun of Charles just so he can gain the will to kill him, so he could live on through the Culling games, or how he tries to help Kashimo with his one single goal of fighting Sukuna. And speaking of that entire dynamic between Kashimo and Hakari, I just want to say that this is my favorite battle within the entire arc. I'm like a complete sucker for these battle-crazed characters in anime, the ones who live to fight and fight to live. And they do that within like the most honorable ways possible. Like the characters who can gracefully be beat and look death in the eyes and still, besides all that, be able to just compliment and support their adversaries. And that's why this entire fight is just perfect to me, because Hakari crashes in with his music blaring, his aura raising super high, and Kashimo is loving every second of it. He gets super excited from Hakari's presence. But that's really all I have to say for that, so let's move on to the next section. I wanted to find a Culling game version of this, but this one was just this wallpaper was just too clean. Over in the Sakurajima Colony, Maki's seen killing a bunch of players and cursed spirits, and she comes out and she meets up with Noritoshi. They're just chilling and catching up until they sense a powerful cursed spirit enter the colony. And something feels super strange about him, like he feels almost human. And soon the curse just blasts down and attacks Maki faster than Noritoshi can even like comprehend as it just blasts past him. And Maki tries to defend herself, but this thing is just way too fast. And then soon it shows its actual face and we see that it's Naoya. Naoya? Damn it, someone in the comments of my last video actually told me how to pronounce it, and that's whatever. So we see a flashback with Gakuganji before the Goodwill event where he explains that if you kill a Jujutsu sorcerer or a curse user without cursed energy, then there's a chance that they will come back as a vengeful spirit. And since Maki's mother was the actual one to land a finishing blow on Naoya, it means that he is now a vengeful cursed spirit. He is a complete monster with the full intentions of killing Maki. Since he has her pinned against the wall, Noritoshi decides to help out and he uses magic missile, but he actually ends up just missing. Mainly because it's just too slow and Naoya has become way faster than before. But it's still actually a good distraction because Maki's able to get back up and do like some actual lethal damage to put him down. That is until he goes under a metamorphosis in order to turn himself into a cursed womb. And Noritoshi tries to kill him fast by using piercing blood, but he's still too slow. Naoya fully goes into his final form, which is wait, hold on. Did the most misogynistic character in the entire series just turn into a fucking vagina? That line's fucking crazy. Anyway, Naoya goes punching Noritoshi and he goes flying. But luckily he's seen blocking the attack with blood manipulation, showing that he's actually going to be pretty useful in this battle. Maki jumps in so that they can start jumping him, but Naoya is just too fast for them. And it's because he can still use his 24 frames curse technique. But instead of just being able to freeze people, he's now able to freeze the air. And that means he can just make it explode whenever he wants.
Where is he going? Oh, I've dealt with this before. He's trying to build up speed. And how fast will he be after that? Well, considering the fact that he was a speed of sound and now he's at least 2 times as fast as the— Oh shit! Deja vu.
So after Maki takes a huge hit, Noritoshi jumps in and basically decides to fight him off for about 5 minutes to allow Maki to heal herself. And the only reason Noritoshi is actually able to fight this thing off while not instantly dying is because Naoya is actually like pretty weak in comparison to like other disaster curses. Like back at the Goodwill event when Noritoshi fought Hanami. Hanami was way more durable than Naoya currently is. Unfortunately, that doesn't give him the biggest advantage though. And even though he's giving it his absolute all, he's still prepared to die in this fight. That is until a samurai and a sumo wrestler come out of absolutely nowhere, both crying in tears. Okay, backstory time. There's this reincarnated sorcerer by the name of Hagen Dado, and he's essentially just going throughout the Culling games looking for a katana specifically. He goes far and wide looking for one, and he finally finds one, but unfortunately, it's just a Demon Slayer toy, so he's disappointed in the end. Meanwhile, Rokujushi Maya is essentially asking a bunch of people to play sumo with him. He specifically asked these 2 kids to play sumo with him, but they're too busy playing Pokemon like a couple of dweebs. And unfortunately, no one else in town wants to challenge him to a sumo match either. But eventually he finds out that there is a sumo competition going on in Tokyo, so he decides to go east in order to actually compete. But instead he goes in the complete opposite direction, and he ends up in this fight now. This all distracts Noritoshi for a bit, but Naoya simply just ignores it and just goes for the finishing kill. But luckily for him, Maki's able to intercept the attack even though she's not fully healed yet. And since she's not actually fully healed yet, she decides to rely on the wild cards that's now appeared in the battle. When she hears Hagen scream for katana, she just decides to just throw her soul splitter katana at him. And as soon as he grabs it, he immediately starts chopping up Naoya. And the crazy thing about this character is that he can't even see cursed spirits, but it doesn't matter because he can see everything around them, so it makes it easy for him to hit them. And Maki finds all of that incredibly interesting because of the fact that if he can't see cursed spirits, that means he's just like Maki, which means he has like little to no cursed energy, but still he's more efficient than she ever was. And it makes her wonder what exactly she's missing. Why doesn't she match up to this guy who's in front of her, and why doesn't she match up to someone like Toji, who has the same exact heavenly restriction as her, but it's also way stronger than she is. And as she's in mid-thought, that's when Mayo essentially pulls out his domain expansion, and it's fully centered around these sumo bouts. It only works if his opponent decides to accept the challenge of going into a sumo match with him. And weirdly enough, he decides to choose Maki for his bout. And normally you would think that since this entire situation is way too dire, Maki wouldn't even entertain this. But without thinking too hard, Maki accepts, which of course makes Noritoshi freak the fuck out because he doesn't understand what she's doing. And her only explanation to him is the fact that she's just been overthinking way too much and she needs a chance to blow off some steam. And the reason for why she's doing all these batshit crazy things, like giving this random man her sacred treasure, or accepting a sumo match in the middle of a battle to the death with someone else, is because she desperately needs these wild cards to shake things up. Just like when Yuta went into the colony and he completely broke the stalemate, she needs something that actually could help them win in this moment, and she'll accept literally anything no matter how random it is. So when she gets into his domain, she thinks that she's genuinely ready for him, until he figuratively breaks her ankles and maneuvers around her to take her down. And that's because he of course knows that if he were to take Maki head on, then she'd just eat him alive. And he understands that since he's able to take her down so easily, there must be some crazy mental blockage that's just bogging her down right now and distracting her. And he actually decides to help her through that problem. And this actually throws Maki for a loop because she's never had a genuine mentor before. Unlike someone like Itadori who had Gojo and Nanami, Maki never had anyone. And it's not because she's too proud to ask for help, but it's more because she just genuinely never considered relying on someone else to make her stronger. But of course, this time she's genuinely desperate and she will take whatever help she can accept right now. He notices that her entire problem is based around the fact that she can't see the same exact way that the samurai can. And to explain how to get over that problem, he challenges her to a bunch more sumo matches. This way he can connect her on a spiritual level because he's better at actual sumo than he is at just talking. Or at least I think they're talking on a spiritual level. It might be like that, or like a shared dreamscape, like the whole Sukuna and Jogo situation, but I'm not entirely sure. Anyways, he tells her that she's become way too entangled in herself and others and other curses, just in people in general. And Maki gets genuinely confused with this statement because that's what she thinks sumo is all about, entangling yourself in your opponent and others. And of course the sumo guy agrees, but he says that's only in the ring. A fighter is supposed to develop outside of the ring so that they can beat their opponent in the ring. As soon as you enter the ring, everything that you've experienced is supposed to flow through you. It's like smelling light or seeing sound. You're literally supposed to feel everything. Then the person in front of you and even just the concept of winning and losing become meaningless. Which means, in other words, Maki genuinely needs to strive for freedom. And don't worry if you don't fully grasp the entire concept of everything he's saying. I'm definitely going to try to go into and dissect and give my opinion on that later in this section. But essentially, after she beats the sumo guy and she breaks out of the domain, she feels like she's at her very best. We then find out that time actually passes differently within his domain. And even though in the real world, not even a minute had passed, somehow within his domain, they had gone through like over 1,000 bouts of sumo wrestling. And she came out seeming almost like a different person, like she was taller, more muscular, or at least I think she was. They simply just used the word bigger to describe her new appearance. And everyone's super gagged by this new appearance, but Naoya does not give a single shit, and he still thinks he could kill her just like normal. He once again goes and gains speed to try to hit her, but this time he can't actually catch up with her. And it's because Maki now has heightened senses. Before, she obviously needed glasses in order to see cursed spirits, but ever since her sister died, she gained the ability to see cursed spirits on her own. And Maki was genuinely satisfied with that ability because now she felt just like everyone else, until she realized someone like Toji isn't like everyone else. He's far better, and Maki has his same potential, so she should have the ability to become better than everyone else. And in that moment, Naoya simply tries to sneak attack her through a building, but she's able to dodge in mid-air. And it's specifically because she can see the world differently than she could before. She can now see the difference in temperature and air density, and the surface of the scattered atmosphere. And she finds out how to grab them and push off of them so she can just blitz all around him and punch him down to the ground. And once he's down, that's when the sumo guy essentially does this massive headbutt to him while the samurai cuts him straight in half with his katana. This would normally spark the end for anyone else, but Naoya is simply just such a strong hater that he pulls one more trick out of his ass. Domain expansion. Time Cell Moon Palace. And this forces everyone to transport into his... Wait. Okay, so I made this joke before with his last transformation, but like this has to be on purpose, right? Like it's supposed to... There's supposed to be irony with the fact that the most sexist character is supposed to have imagery of a woman's reproductive system, right? I don't know, maybe like the entire point is to show us that he's like a pussy. I genuinely don't know. But if you like fully understand it, then like comment below and just explain it to me, because I'm pretty sure there's a lot of symbolism that I'm just not picking up on. Anyway, the sumo guy and the katana guy essentially get trapped in the domain, and they get hit by his sure hit effect, but they don't think that anything happens because there genuinely is no like pain or anything. They think, oh, it must have been a misfire or something. This is our chance to attack him now. But as soon as they move, that's when they realize that their cells are like tearing apart because they didn't move the right way. And that's because Naoya's ability is super accurate. Like it can just zoom in on like a cellular level. Sorry guys, words are hard. And Naoya thinks that Maki already died because he doesn't see her anywhere, but then he realizes that he can't even sense her, which is like normal because she doesn't have any cursed energy, so of course he can't sense her. But she should be in his domain, and if she's in his domain, he should know where she is at all times. The samurai tries to hit Naoya while he's in mid-thought, but because he doesn't move the right way, his hand just gets ripped off, and his hand and the katana basically go flying past Naoya. But it doesn't just fly past him, it flies right into Maki's hand. You see, the reason for why Naoya couldn't sense Maki this entire time is specifically because she doesn't have any cursed energy, so the domain saw her as any other object. And when a domain senses an object, it just like kind of doesn't actually interpolate it into its actual domain. Like with a building. Like if a building gets trapped in a domain, it's not even going to be like trapped in an actual domain. It's just going to recognize it as just some random object and not something to actually target. And since Maki doesn't have any actual cursed energy, it saw her as the same exact thing. So the only way she could actually go and get trapped in the domain is if she decided to get trapped in the domain. Which of course, right now, she decided to do that so she could pull a sneak attack off on Naoya. So of course she stabs him in the back, but Naoya thinks that since she is in the domain now, that means she has to abide by his rules or she'll basically die from moving. So he tries to do one last finishing attack on her while she can't move, but as we learned before, she has no cursed energy, so that means she still cannot be targeted by his attack. So as he tries to do his final attack to her, she essentially just cuts him right in half. And that basically kills him, destroys the domain, and frees everyone. And in that moment, the narrator says that 12 years after the death of Toji Zenin, there had been a new demonic warrior equal to his strength that was born within Maki. And that is essentially the end of her section. And I'm gonna be completely honest with you. This was probably my least favorite section and fight within this part of the Culling game, which is really weird because in my last video on JJK, I was completely gushing about Maki the entire time because I loved her entire story arc of basically throwing away her heart to become something more. And this time I didn't really care, and maybe it's because the whole entire thing she was trying to learn was a little bit more vague than usual. The reason for why she got stronger within this battle is because she learned to stop focusing on the things just in front of her, but focus on everything around her. And of course that makes sense if you don't look at it like at fully face value. The point is that she's like focusing directly on her opponent all the time, and if she just focused on literally everything else, then she would become stronger by simply just noticing that she could just literally bounce off the atmosphere and almost kind of fly through the air to make herself way more agile in order to beat her opponents in battle. Which again, I guess it makes sense, but I kind of wish that the lesson was way more personal to her. And I actually thought it was going to be because we saw a glimpse of that when she meets and talks to the sumo guy. When she steps into his domain and he immediately tries to help her through her mental blockage, a thought crosses through her mind of the fact that she's never relied on anyone to get stronger. And that's only funny to me because that feels like a very recent lie, because very recently, she relied on her sister in order to get stronger. Now, of course, Mai was holding Maki back this entire time, but she still had to make the active choice of sacrificing herself so that Maki could get stronger. And also by giving her the second best curse tool within the series, which was the Soul Split Katana. But the point is, she got stronger by relying on someone else. For the entire series, she's had a heavily restriction on her body. And I think that actually matches her mind, because the thing is, her mind also basically makes her restrict herself with her own power, because she's so tunnel vision. She basically restricts her own power by not accepting help from anyone else. While if you look at someone like Itadori, who basically accepts help from everyone. He accepts help from Gojo, Nanami, even Todo, and anyone else who comes by. And that's why he grows so fast and why he gets so strong, because he has others he relies on. Even though Maki has actually worked with other people in the past, I never got the vibe that she genuinely wanted to work with them. But this time she actually wants to work with Noritoshi, and she gives away her prized possession made by her sister, her actual katana, and she just gives it to this random samurai. And she also just decides to go into this random guy's domain in order to learn what true freedom really means. And obviously this was supposed to be the main point of it, because I'm pretty sure she actually does say it at one point within the battle, but I wish there was more focus on it, because subtext is very hard for us JJK fans to fully understand. But going back into this being like my least favorite battle and section, honestly, I don't know. I just did not care for the first half. I was genuinely bored for the first part of this battle until we got the 2 new wild cards, which I started to get more interested in. And I don't really have much to say about them because they're super one-dimensional, but I mean, like, that's the entire point of them. One guy just wanted a katana, the other guy just wanted to do sumo. Like, that's it. It's real sweet, it's real simple. And once they both got what they wanted, they decided to help Maki because she basically helped them. Like I said before, it's simple, it's straight to the point, and I love that for them. I genuinely actually think I love both of those characters more than I love Noritoshi. And maybe that's specifically because I just don't understand Noritoshi. Like, I understand that everything, from what I can glean, I think that everything that Noritoshi does is for his mother. Just like how Maki wanted to take over the entire Zenin clan for the sake of her sister, Noritoshi wants to do the same exact thing, but he wants to do it for his mom. But after seeing that his mother basically started an entirely new family without him, this kind of made him feel abandoned, and it made him feel abandoned by both his family and his own clan, making him feel super alone. And that's one of the reasons why he was so fully ready to die for his comrades, because he felt like he has nothing else to live for. It's actually like all really sad, but it felt too shoehorned into the last second, or at least from what I can tell. I didn't understand this character until this battle, and because it just feels like it's coming out of nowhere and way too late. I genuinely did not care if he died in the battle. But that's honestly all I really needed to say for this section, so onward to the next. So we're back in Colony number 1 on November 14th, where we see that Kurusu is greeting Megumi as he's waking up from his comatose state. Itadori is there to greet him, telling him that he's been out for about 2 days, while Takaba enters the room basically bringing ice cream with him for everyone. They all explain to Megumi that they basically all met because Itadori saw Takaba's fight with the explosion guy way back when, and then they decided to team up to find Megumi. And when they easily found him because they saw like an angel just flying around and just carrying him while he was comatose. They then explained to him that everyone on the team has gained enough points to save Megumi's sister, and since Takaba and Kurusu are also on the team, they don't really mind sharing their points with him to help him out. But Megumi has like a bunch more questions for Kurusu because he assumes that she's Angel, and instead of her actually being able to answer, that's when we see that this mouth pops up on her cheek, just like how Itadori's mouth pops up on his cheek whenever Sukuna's talking. There's another mouth that actually pops up that answers for her. It's then that we actually find out that Kurusu is just a vessel for Angel, the same way that Itadori is a vessel for Sukuna. The only difference is that Angel is actually good. She's not pure evil like Sukuna. She's actually really only here because she wants to destroy all of the other incarnated sorcerers who came back in this day because they don't belong in this timeline. She then explains that her entire curse technique is able to negate other curse techniques, and that also basically involves barriers and seals. So of course they ask her if she can break Gojo out of the prison realm, and she's pretty confident that she can do that. But the only thing that she wants to return is for them to help her kill and defeat the Fallen, or the Disgraced One, depending on whichever version you're reading. Either way, there's someone super evil that just doesn't belong in this time and just needs to die, and she needs their help to kill him. And before Itadori agrees to this, that's when Sukuna pulls him into their inner world to essentially tell him that he is the Fallen. And let me tell you, when I first read this, it was like one of the most hardest mic drops within this series, mainly because it implied that since Angel needed to kill the Fallen and Sukuna was the Fallen, that meant that Angel needed to kill Itadori in order to save Gojo. But spoiler alert, this genuinely is not as exciting as it sounds. It's cool in concept, but not in execution. Still an amazing cliffhanger for a chapter though, but let's continue. So Itadori just doesn't want to say all this out loud in front of Angel, so he essentially goes to the other side of the room. He plays charades with Megumi for a bit, and at first Megumi doesn't understand what he's saying until he realizes that maybe Itadori's probably trying to tell him that Sukuna is the Fallen. And the real problem that actually arises from Megumi realizing that is that Megumi realizes that Itadori is definitely willing to die for this cause. If Itadori has to, he'll definitely sacrifice himself so that Angel will just go and free Gojo. But luckily that conversation never actually happens because essentially right in the middle of this, that's when Angel notices that there's an incredible number of players just entering the game at the moment. And Kogame pops up to basically confirm that 807 people have entered the game, and the number's probably rising at this point. And this number has only risen within the last couple of minutes. Then we get a flashback all the way back to February 2018, which was 9 months before the Culling game even began. And this entire flashback focuses back when Kenjaku was essentially in the White House explaining to everyone what cursed energy was and cursed spirits and all that. He gives them these glasses, the same glasses that Maki basically used to have, in order for them to see his cursed spirits. And then he uses this footage that Mekumaru basically caught when he was alive to show them all the events that happened, basically in the same way that the audience watched JJK from season 1 and 2. They see everything from the beginning all the way to the Shibuya incident. And although everyone, including the president, is extremely skeptical of all this information, there's still one man by the name of Cyrus Vale who essentially sees all of this as a way to gain power. His entire job is basically to make environmental energy for the country. So when he sees cursed energy, he basically thinks that America needs this so that they don't get left behind by everyone else when all of this information goes public. So they essentially come up with the plan to essentially go over to Japan, capture their citizens, and study how cursed energy works. And the president justifies this by saying that when the information goes public, that means America is gonna have to protect Japan from other people, because every other country or whatever, a nation's gonna wanna go to Japan and do the same exact thing. And they might put Japan in danger. So that's why America needs to do it, so they can protect the Japanese citizens. Which is, of course, Bullshit, but you know, go off, King. So the Lieutenant General basically says that they're gonna need about like just one company in order to capture 5 sorcerers. But Kenjaku essentially tells them, nah, you're wrong, you're gonna need about 800 soldiers. And in order to prove this, Kenjaku basically kills like a dozen soldiers, like who are like really heavily armed and trained, just to show them how powerful one sorcerer can actually be. And that's how we got ourselves into this current situation now. But before I actually focus on that, I want to focus on what's actually going on with Yuki and Choso, because man oh man, what's going on with them is way more interesting. You see, Yuki and Tengen are essentially just yapping about all the star plasma vessels in the past that he assimilated into. And the conversation is stopped short because Kenjaku decides to invade Tengen's barrier all by himself because he's just that guy. And the first line of defense is Choso, and Kenjaku, when he sees Choso, decides to go on his entire evil plan rant to essentially show him what will happen if he wins and basically gains control of Tengen. He essentially wants to get Tengen so that Tengen can evolve, and since Tengen is more cursed spirit than actual human, he wants him to evolve so that all Japanese citizens who aren't sorcerers already will essentially fuse into him and turn into like one giant cursed spirit, or at least that's what he thinks will happen. In reality, the possibilities are genuinely endless of what would actually happen if Tengen fused with humanity. Which is actually one of the reasons for why he wants to do it, just to see what would happen. And with that, Choso essentially decides to waste this psychopath. Choso tries hitting Kenjaku with piercing blood, but Kenjaku is able to essentially counter the attack by throwing a low-level curse at him, which Choso then just cuts in half. Choso believes that he's being underestimated in this battle, but Kenjaku genuinely believes that he's using just as much force as needed, which is why he's only using low-level curses on him, because he thinks that Choso is just a low-level sorcerer. Kenjaku tries to close the distance in by punching Choso, but once Kenjaku punches Choso away, Choso essentially left him with a supernova, but Kenjaku's easily able to block it using one of his cursed spirits as a meat shield. Then Choso takes a moment to actually ask Kenjaku what his plans specifically are with Yuji, and Kenjaku answers by saying that Yuji's role has already been fulfilled. The entire point that Kenjaku gave birth to Yuji was essentially just to make sure that Sukuna had a vessel. And as long as Sukuna and Yuji live, then the cycle of curses just will always continue, which is exactly what Kenjaku wants. Choso then shoots at Kenjaku for essentially shifting the blame on Yuji, which Choso thinks is like completely false because Kenjaku is basically the reason for why all of this mess is actually happening in the world. But during Choso's entire tantrum fit, Kenjaku basically has these cursed spirits basically sneak from beneath Choso to stop him in his tracks, and that's when Kenjaku just decides to wail on him while he's trapped. Kenjaku explains that he just completely understands that their plan is to essentially just have Choso out there to push Kenjaku to his limit so that he can essentially show all of his cards and all of his curses so that when Yuki comes in after him, she'll be ready for whatever attack he has up his sleeve. He then blasts Choso with a bunch of low-grade cursed spirits to essentially like remind him that he stole the body of someone who was a special grade, meaning that he has the power to overthrow nations. He has the ability to strengthen and lower the cursed output of other curses, and so he only needs these low-level curses to beat Choso. He doesn't need to use anything big, so their entire plan is basically a failure because he's not going to use anything that's actually going to inform Yuki of a way to beat him. He also talks a lot of shit on Choso's brothers because they were all failed experiments, and Choso of course takes this shit super personally. And in order to get a little bit of revenge, he actually asks his brothers from the afterlife to give him strength, and they actually listen, and this works because he starts using the powers of his dead brothers. He uses Esso's ability, which was like the piercing blood barrage, which fires multiple piercing blood attacks at once, and the king wings to help him like fly, and he grows wings. But Kenjaku isn't impressed at all by any of this, and he just calls him a cheap copy while using some cursed spirits to block the attacks. Kenjaku then asks if there's a point to any of this, completely trivializing all of Choso's efforts. But in reality, Choso isn't done yet, and he still has way more fight in him. He uses Echisu's ability to basically rip off his hand and throw it straight at Kenjaku, and when he grabs Kenjaku, he uses his blood to pull it back, forcing Kenjaku to essentially come right to him, and that's when he uses Yuji's strength in order to punch him straight in the face, well, into the ground. At least he thinks he punches him in the face, but Kenjaku actually blocked with a lower grade cursed spirit again, forcing Kenjaku to basically ask, "Are you done yet?" Like how a mother would act towards a child throwing an entire tantrum, which is, you know, pretty on brand since they technically are father and son, or mother and son, depending on how you look at it. But Choso is still relentless, and he decides to use his tracking piercing blood on Kenjaku, which turns into a bunch of supernovas that surround him and explode, And we see that Kenjaku still somehow blocked the blast, and this would normally be a bad thing until Choso realizes that he didn't use Cursed Spirit Manipulation to block the blast that time because he said didn't have enough time, which means that Kenjaku used a completely different ability than we've ever seen him use before. And witnessing that curse technique at play essentially forces Yuki to finally come out and tell Choso that she has it from here. So he immediately passes out and just low clips the reality. Kenjaku is extremely conscious around her because he has no idea what her actual curse technique actually is. So he just throws this divine special grade curse spirit at her that has the ability to remove obstacles in a conceptual way. She circumvents this curse by simply taking her Shikigami, rolling it up into a ball, and kicking the shit out of it, forcing it to just rip through the curse's head. Then she blitzes Kenjaku and essentially just punches him so hard that his arms just break apart and he just is sent flying across the entire dimension until he hits the barrier and breaks through it. But not before she actually tells him that the entire key to her ability is mass, making the punch even stronger than what it should have been. That's when we find out that her ability is called Star Rage, and it essentially allows her to turn herself into virtual mass along with her Shikigami, which she turned into a cursed tool using said ability. And with this ability alone, Kenjaku wonders if he can actually beat her with any of his cursed spirits, or if he himself can actually beat her with his own abilities. And at the same exact time, Yuki also wonders if she can actually take Kenjaku down because she realizes that his ability, his third ability, is basically able to control gravity, which is the ability that he used to block Choso's earlier attack. And they both don't know the extent of each other's abilities, so they both instantly get annoyed. So Kenjaku basically decides to just open his domain expansion. And he opens his domain simply because he believes that she isn't confident in her abilities in a domain clash, because if she was, then she just would have used it already. But in reality, they were all just waiting for him to open his domain so that they can continue with their master plan, which is to have Tengen neutralize Kenjaku's domain with his own barrier, because Tengen is a master of barrier techniques. Unfortunately, they didn't consider that Kenjaku would actually know how to use a domain expansion without using a barrier. He basically has the same amount of skill that Sukuna had back in Shibuya. So instead, Tengen essentially just decides to just stop using his barrier to essentially create a domino effect that allows Kenjaku's domain to just disintegrate and for them all to just fall out of their dimension into the lower level. But Tengen was way too late with this plan because Kenjaku had already dealt hella damage on Yuki before the domain actually stopped, because the entire time he was chipping away at her simple domain. And because of this, Kenjaku essentially assumes that he basically already won, and he chastises her the entire time, basically saying that she shouldn't have relied on Tengen, and that if she just would have used her own domain expansion instead of relying on Tengen, then there's a chance she actually would have won the battle. But he stops talking shit as soon as he realizes that Yuki Shikigami is still alive, and since the Shikigami hasn't disappeared yet, that means that Yuki is still actually like alive and kicking and still able to fight. And that's when Yuki and her Shikigami essentially start double teaming him. And Kenjaku feels super pressured in this moment because he doesn't have time to essentially heal his burnt out curse technique, because he thought that he would have time to do that since Yuki is super mangled up and is on the verge of death. But she simply just refuses to heal herself so that Kenjaku just doesn't get a break. And this jumping just shows us how much Yuki just has that dog in her. But Kenjaku isn't really too threatened right now because Yuki is still super mangled up. She's super beat up, almost on the verge of death, while Kenjaku hasn't actually gained any damage throughout this entire battle. So he believes that there's nothing that she can actually do to surprise him. And the thing is, he's mostly right, which is why Choso decides to fill that role by no-clipping back into reality. And this was a part of their plan the entire time, because if Kenjaku would have known that he would have had someone else to fight after Yuki, he would have never opened his domain so that he wouldn't have been vulnerable to any attacks because of his curse technique burnout. So Choso comes in using piercing blood, and Gerudo wraps himself around Kenjaku so he can't move, and he weighs himself down so he's just stuck there. But Kenjaku still somehow dodges the attack by like moving his head into it and basically only allowing it to quite literally split his wig and expose his brain. And since Kenjaku's already used to basically having an exposed brain, it has like no effect on him. But Yuki assumes since he's actually starting to pull out shit like that, then it must mean that he's genuinely running out of actual tricks. So that means they essentially just go back to jumping his ass. In the middle of the jumping, Yuki uses reverse curse technique in order to heal herself, but that allows Kenjaku to essentially get away from their grasp. So she essentially grabs her Shikigami's tail and just starts basically throwing him around like a whip, basically destroying the entire room, causing mass destruction. And right when they have him on the ropes, that's when he essentially regains his curse technique and uses it to push Choso down to the ground. And since the curse technique lasts in intervals of 6 seconds, Yuki decides that this is like her only chance to actually try to take him down. But Kenjaku counters by using an Uzumaki, which essentially just takes all of his cursed spirits and essentially just fuses them into this small ball of energy that he just shoots at her. He tries shooting at her face, but she's able to actually block the attack. But unfortunately for her, she isn't able to actually see the second attack, which has an Uzumaki that blasts like right through her stomach, basically cutting her in half. Choso tries to use one final desperate attack against the Kenjaku, but Yuki essentially reminds him that his work here is done. And at the same time, Tengen opens another hole for Choso to essentially fall through and escape, but this is completely against his will. As Yuki falls to the ground, now split into 2 different pieces, he essentially turns his attention away from her and on to Tengen, who is now making an appearance. He asks Tengen how he plans on stopping him, and Tengen just responds saying that he's not really there to stop him, he's just there to distract him. At that point, Yuki grabs on to Kenjaku's ankle and he tells her to just die already.
Please just kill yourself already. Okay. What the fuck? What is this? I turned myself into a black hole. You what?
So Yuki uses her ultimate attack, essentially turning her body into the ultimate mass, which in turns her into an entire black hole. And that destroys everything within the vicinity, including herself. And I shit you not, somehow Kenjaku survives this. And even Tengen asks how the fuck he pulled that off. And Kenjaku explains that he essentially used the curse technique from the original vessel that he had that was Itadori's biological mother, which was anti-gravity, and he used reverse curse technique to essentially reverse the mass of the black hole. And that's when Kenjaku turns his attentions right back towards Tengen again and he absorbs his body. So, hooray! He wins! Exciting section, huh? I've still got like 13 more chapters to go, but they're all still just exciting, so stick around for that. I do actually need to stop and talk about this battle a little bit though, because I absolutely love the spectacle of it all. This battle did really well in hyping up Yuki and Kenjaku, because this is the first time we ever genuinely see them go all out, specifically really Yuki. The first attack she throws out is one that essentially just rips off the head of this ancient special grade cursed spirit, and the next attack she does breaks off the arms of the main villain that we virtually never actually see take damage up until now. Well, in terms of the hyping up her power, Gege did a genuinely good job of hyping up this entire character and her strength, but obviously not a perfect job because she still dies, specifically because she relies on Tengen instead of her own strength. So that makes her a wasted character in all honesty, and it's not just because of the results of this battle, it's because of all the hype that we've seen from this character ever since we were introduced to Todo. And remember, she's the one who trained that beast. So of course, you know, maybe some of us expect a little bit more from her. She was also the only known special grade within the series that we hadn't seen fight up until this point. We didn't know her abilities and neither did anyone else in the verse. Even Kenjaku had no idea what she was capable of once he actually came face to face with her. Also, she had this entire idea to just eradicate all cursed energy within the world. And within her pursuit of that goal, she ended up creating Ghetto, essentially this character that became insane and just wanted to kill every single non-sorcerer in the world because he realized that cursed energy, or at least the leakage of cursed energy, which creates cursed spirits, is essentially the main thing that's wrong with the world. I guess she just feels like she was supposed to be this grand character, and having her die without making any difference at all within the Culling game is extremely bizarre to me. But luckily enough, this fight isn't a complete waste of time because we have someone like Choso who actually developed within this fight. Within the middle of this fight, we see a flashback between Choso and Yuki, where he essentially talks about the fact that he really hates that he decided to choose the side of curses instead of humans. And he did it because of the fact that his brothers look like absolute monsters. And if he would have taken his brothers into the human world, then they would have been basically ostracized. Everyone would have just been terrified of them, so there was no possible way for them to actually live amongst humans. But it was because of this that when his brothers met Itadori for the first time, Itadori was forced to kill them because Choso chose the side of curses. If Choso would have never actually chosen the side of curses and he would have been a human alongside Itadori, then they never would have actually had to fight. No one would have had to die and kill each other, so he blames himself for all of that. So within this battle, Choso essentially decides to just put his life on the line in order to make a better future for Itadori. But Yuki essentially just keeps telling him that he died a human back in Shibuya. Like, he's basically earned his right to be a human and that he should live in order to see Itadori's future. And of course, by the end of this battle, Yuki sacrifices herself for his sake. And I think that's actually one of the reasons for why I hate the fact that Yuki died so early on, because I love the dynamic between Choso and Yuki. I wanted to see their dynamic evolve a little bit, and I'm not saying I'm like shipping them or anything, but you know, I wouldn't have minded some kind of romantic subplot between them, or even if they were just bros, because we already saw that Yuki called Choso like the ultimate big brother. So it's like if they would have had like that Itadori and Todo type dynamic, where they're like, oh, we're like brothers now. I thought that would have been cool. It's just them having just be these best buddies, because they already had that dynamic and they already had that rapport with each other. Okay, but fast forward back to the Culling game where the military's invading and they basically are like capturing all the sorcerers and taking their blood. And the soldiers actually do a decent job of taking down some sorcerers until some curses show up. And it's at this point that we actually find out Kenjaku's real plan was to lure the military in so that they can all die from curses. Simply because his ritual required more souls to die and the Culling games was already slowing down and he needed more souls to come in and sacrifice themselves. That's why he basically said, hey, military, come in and attack us or whatever, so that they can just lead themselves into this massive trap where they all die. Soon our main group of heroes essentially figure out what Kenjaku's entire plan is, and even though like it's already working to a point where you can't really stop it, like there's so many souls dying to the point where there's so much cursed energy everywhere that no matter what, Kenjaku's plans are basically already worked. But regardless of that, Itadori still wants to jump in and save all these people because he can't just stand by and watch all these people die. So they go out, Itadori talks a little bit of shit to Angel because he doesn't want her to replace Kukusaki. We also find out Angel was saved by Megumi in the past, which is why like she actually likes Megumi and why she saved them in the first place. And then 2 days later, that's when Japan crosses over to the other side. Now I know what you're thinking, why did I just now rush through this entire section and why did I just now skip 2 days into the future? Well, that's because Gege himself essentially just decided to skip over everything. Like literally, he gave up on this entire plot line, and I genuinely think it's because he got bored writing it. I think the writer himself got bored of this entire military arc and decided to just skip through everything. And I'll talk more on that later, which I think is super hilarious and absolutely insane that he did that. But like you can tell that he did that simply because we go from this nonsense all the way to like one of the best moments in this entire arc. The gang all talk about what they're gonna do with the points, and that's when they finally decide it's time to just save Megumi's sister Sukumi. And to do this, they create a rule using the points that essentially states that you can essentially leave the Culling games as long as you spend 100 points to take someone else outside of the Culling games and use them as a substitute for you, basically replacing you as a player for the game. So they bring his sister to the location and she's like, okay, I completely understand the plan. You give me the points. I use the points to replace myself with Ichiji. And that's it. That's all that needs to happen. And everyone's all like, okay, Sukumi, you get the entire idea. We can trust you with this. And they give her the points. And to everyone's surprise, instead of using the points to exit the game, she instead uses the points to create a new rule. And this rule is to basically allow everyone to pass through the barriers of the colonies whenever they choose to. And of course, again, like I said, everyone's super confused about this, except Megumi. Megumi realizes that the person standing before them isn't his sister. Because I gotta remind you guys, Kenjaku made 2 different types of players for the Culling games. He essentially made he awakened people who didn't have a curse technique and basically were never going to ever awaken them on their own, so that they can come in and use their powers in the Culling game. And then he awakened the type of people that were vessels for sorcerers of the past, like Itadori and Angel. And no one ever considered that Sukumi might actually just be a vessel for someone else. And I genuinely think that this is the best plot twist in all of JJK. The sorcerer who's inhabiting Sukumi's body essentially introduces herself as Yorozu. Yorozu. I think it's Yorozu. And the reason why she's been using Megumi is simply because she wanted to use his points in order to choose her opponent and her battlefield. And the person that she's been craving to fight for the last 1,000 years has been Sukuna. She flies off, causing Angel and Itadori to try to chase after her, but they can't actually chase after her because in that same moment, Sukuna says the words enchant and instantly takes over Itadori's body. You see, all the way back in the beginning of the series, Itadori and Sukuna made a binding vow causing Sukuna to essentially possess Itadori whenever he wants for 1 minute as long as he says the word enchant. The only stipulation to this is the fact that Itadori basically said that he can't hurt anyone while he possesses Itadori during this time. And since Sukuna can only do this once, he has to be very quick about whatever he wants to accomplish during this time. The first thing he does is go to Angel, press on her pressure points to essentially make her pass out so he doesn't actually hurt her, but so that she also can't interfere in his plans. Then he rips off Itadori's finger from his body and turns it into a cursed object. Megumi is absolutely scared shitless and tries to summon Maharaga in order to stop him. But Sukuna grabs onto Megumi's hand, stopping him from summoning Maharaga, and he forces his cursed finger down Megumi's throat. And in the next moment, we see that Itadori's tattoos disappear, and even his eyes, which have never actually fully disappeared, the eyelids disappeared off of his face, and when he looks up, he sees that Megumi has those eyes now. He has those tattoos now, meaning that Megumi is fully possessed by Sukuna. We then figure out that this was Sukuna's plan ever since the beginning. Ever since the first time he ever fought Megumi, he decided that he wanted Megumi's power, and he realized that Megumi was going to be a good enough vessel to actually hold him. His only problem was that he didn't want another situation where, like he had with Itadori, where he couldn't control the body. He didn't want to be left in this cage. So to make sure that he could actually fully take over Megumi's body, he wanted to wait for a point where Megumi was at his lowest, emotionally and spiritually. In the moment where Megumi was at his lowest was the point where he saw that his sister had been taken over by this unknown force. Itadori calls for Megumi, but the only one to answer this call is Sukuna. And he answers this call by just using this devastating punch that just knocks Itadori across the city and through multiple buildings. That insane ass beating essentially draws attention of Maki and the comedian, and they try to run over to their location as soon as possible. But Sukuna stops them by summoning this giant version of Nue that shoots lightning down on everyone. And that seemingly just stops them in their tracks. But then Angel intervenes, and Hana doesn't actually want to take down Sukuna right now because he's possessing Megumi, and she likes Megumi. But Angel has to remind her that they've been after Sukuna this entire time. They have to take him down right here and right now. So she decides to use her ultimate move, Jacob's Ladder, which is this giant Akira type beam that falls from the sky and just rains down on Sukuna, causing more damage than we've ever seen him take before. And he takes so much damage to the fact where he realizes that he needs to get desperate, and he essentially just starts acting like he's Megumi again. And of course Angel's like, Hana, don't listen, this is a trick, we need to kill him right now, that's not actually Megumi. But Hana, hilariously enough, still falls for this, and Sukuna just ends up tricking her, of course, and takes a bite out of her and throws her off the building. Itadori watches as she falls down and splats onto another building, and this forces this intense rage out of him where he now wants to use every ounce of his strength to destroy Sukuna. Itadori jumps onto one of the buildings, getting Sukuna's attention, and Sukuna just wonders how Itadori is even standing right now to face him when he literally just got launched across the city. Then Itadori launches himself with his new strength at Sukuna, completely catching Sukuna off guard, causing Sukuna to assume that somehow, some way, Itadori is somehow from the past, from an old era, like the Heian era, and it must be for some reason from the interference of Kenjaku. Itadori asks Sukuna why he can't just live a normal life and why he has to cause misery wherever he goes. And after Sukuna stops him in his tracks by cutting him, that's when he actually gives him a genuine answer. Sukuna asks Itadori why he's so weak, but yet somehow expects to be happy. The entire path that Itadori leads can only lead to his own destruction. And Sukuna believes that if they actually want to be happy, they should spend their entire lives trying to stifle their own misery. But Itadori throws his counterclaim saying, well, since you're so strong, Sukuna, you should be the one stifling the misery of others. You should be the one to help everyone and basically destroy all that misery. I genuinely actually love this conversation a lot because it's so much better than Mahito's I am you speech. Because back then in Shibuya, it felt like Mahito was just blabbering on about a bunch of random semantics that really had no substance to them. Nothing actually felt deep, whereas in this example where Sukuna barely actually says anything, it's way deeper. It's it has an actual valid source of why he's evil. If we wanted to be really specific with Sukuna's words by pinpointing it specifically to Itadori, then he's completely right. Itadori is literally sacrificing all of his happiness to be this cog in the system just to help everyone be happy, just like his grandfather wanted from him. But literally every single thing he's done for that goal has caused his own suffering. Whereas if we look at Sukuna, who only is just into self-preservation and only cares about himself, he seems way more content than any quote-unquote hero in this show. This also leads into his entire might makes right philosophy, where he genuinely believes that if you're weak, then you just don't deserve happiness or a fulfilling life. He tells Itadori to come closer, and as Itadori walks closer to him, Sukuna just slashes him over his entire body. But despite that, Itadori still presses on, and with his indomitable will, he just ignores all the slashes. And this is probably Itadori's most badass moment in the entire series, especially because right after that, he just decks Sukuna right in the face. At first, Sukuna assumes that Itadori had just gotten tougher, but then he realizes that it's not actually that. It's actually Megumi suppressing Sukuna's power. And even though Sukuna has complete control over Megumi's body, basically Megumi's mental state is suppressing Sukuna's curse energy level so much that it's like at 10% output, which is the lowest it's ever been in the series. Regardless of this, he still thinks he actually has enough power to kill Itadori. That is until Maki pulls up. And when she pulls up to the party, that's when they just start jumping him. And they also have a brief conversation about what needs to be done in this battle. Maki asks if the goal is to stop Sukuna, even if it means killing Megumi. And Itadori doesn't hesitate to say yes. We're going to kill him no matter what. And that is such a breath of fresh air. Normally the entire trope is that they're trying to like so desperately save their friend so that they actually can't kill the villain because the villain took over their body and they just don't want to actually hurt who they're trying to save. But in this situation, they're not actually trying to save Megumi. Like, Itadori is so sick and tired of Sukuna's shit that he's just like, fuck it, I don't care if I kill my best friend. We're just gonna destroy Sukuna. We just don't give a shit anymore. Like, Itadori has had it up to here with Sukuna. So they both go after Sukuna with coordinated attacks, but Sukuna is still able to fend them off. And since Megumi is essentially stopping him from actually hurting his friends with full force, he decides to use his full force instead on his environment to trip them all up. He then lands an actual solid blow on Maki, but Maki tanks it like a G, forcing Sukuna to put respect on her name. Unfortunately, before the fight can actually get heated up, that's when Urame comes out of nowhere and uses Frost Calm at like 100% maximum output. And that completely freezes Maki and Itadori solid so that they can't move. She then apologizes for interfering in Sukuna's battle and says that she didn't try to use all of her power on Itadori because she didn't want to kill him. And Sukuna just tells her that it's completely fine and that she interfered. And he says that it's a good thing that she actually focused all of her attention on Maki because Maki was the only real threat here. He then pulls out Nue and tells her that it's time for them to leave and prepare for a bath. But then she tells him that she already attended to all of that, and Sukuna compliments her on her diligence, saying that she attends to every single detail, which essentially makes her super duper happy from getting that compliment from her bestie. And I just want to say that I absolutely love their entire dynamic because even though the dynamic is supposed to be like master and servant, they seem more like best friends. So far within this story, Sukuna has only shown kindness and actual genuine excitement for Urame whenever they see each other. And of course, Urame shows the exact same to him. And they don't show that kind of respect or excitement to anyone else within this series. And they seem like the perfect pair too, specifically just because of the fact that Urame has ice powers and Sukuna has these secret fire powers that hasn't been fully explained yet. And it also makes me wonder how strong Urame is because Sukuna only recognizes strength. So if this is basically Sukuna's best friend, how strong is Urame? Like, I wonder what we actually can see from this character in the future. Alright, but back to the story. Itadori breaks out of the ice and chases after them while screaming Sukuna's name. And as they fly away, Sukuna laughs at Yuji and compares his face to that of the Harima statue, which after looking it up, I can completely see the resemblance and I understand why they were both laughing their ass off at him. After this win under Sukuna's belt, that's when he decides to go and bathe in some cursed spirit juice in order to break Megumi's soul. And although this actually does help Sukuna gain a lot of control over Megumi's body, it's not good enough because he needs to completely break Megumi. And he thinks that one of the best ways to actually pull this off is by killing Megumi's sister, which makes sense because the spirit that's inhabiting her body already challenged him to a fight, so it's nothing for him to actually go do the fight and kill the person who challenged him and his sister at the same exact time. On his way there, he kills Pompadour guy, womp womp, and then that's when he goes and challenges Yorozu. They tussle for a bit, giving these hints that they have a past with each other, and they took a break for Yorozu to essentially say the reason for why she knew that Sukuna was in Itadori's body and Angel didn't is because Yorozu is truly in love with Sukuna. And because she's truly in love with him, she knows exactly where he is whenever she wants to. And of course, since she's so in love with him, she wants to be the one to kill him and she wants him to be the one to kill her. And she wants to make this wager with him, basically asking what he'll give her in return if she wins. And Sukuna essentially says everything. And it's not because he loves her or anything, it's specifically because that If she wins, it means that he dies, and it doesn't matter what she does with his corpse. She then asks if that also includes marriage, and he says, yeah, whatever, sure. And she gets absolutely ecstatic and pumped up, making a binding vow out of it and everything. Sukuna tries bursting her entire bubble using his divine dogs, but Yorozu essentially fights them off using these black ooze-like tendrils to attack them. But this actually does throw Yorozu off a little bit because she realizes that he's using the Ten Shadows technique. He's not using his original technique against her. And Sukuna says that he does not intend on using Malevolent Shrine to kill her. And this is specifically because he wants to use Megumi's technique in order to kill her. He wants Megumi to actually know that it's his fault for why his sister died. So Sukuna is essentially handicapping himself in order to absolutely destroy the soul of Megumi. Yorozu doesn't initially grasp his reasoning, so she starts crying, screaming, foaming at the mouth, sliding down the wall with a blunt in her hand, spitting up blood. She's having an entire temper tantrum because she does not want to be touched by someone else's curse technique. She thinks that's really too kinky for her, you know? And she also finds it super patronizing that Sukuna thinks he can kill her without using his original technique. It's then that we figure out that her entire curse technique is construction, which basically means that she can create any substance she wants besides curse tools, and she uses that substance to create this bio-exoskeleton around her body. And because this armor is just so strong, Sukuna thinks that this is the perfect time to test out the Ten Shadows technique to its fullest. He summons Maharaga's wheel over his head, but she punches him before he can actually do anything with the ability. He once again summons his divine dogs, but she just handles them super quickly and just kicks him through a wall. And she taunts him, practically begging him to use his curse technique, to use Shrine, to cut her open so that he can see her love from the inside. And she tries to overwhelm him by basically wrapping him up and surrounding him with her liquid metal, but he's able to break through it using another Ten Shadow that we haven't seen before, called Round Ear. It immediately disperses the liquid metal by using reverse curse technique, and then uses the same technique in order to heal Sukuna's wounds. Then Sukuna pulls out Piercing Ox, which is basically the Shikigami that essentially can run only in a straight line, but the longer it runs for, the stronger its attack gets, and it essentially just keeps running until it eventually breaks her armor. Sukuna taunts her, essentially reminding her that he didn't need to use Shrine to beat her, and he asks if this is all her love amounts to. And she tells him that she has a lot to teach him about love, but he simply giggles at the thought. And she comes to the conclusion that the reason why he's laughing is because he's already been taught love by someone else, and she refuses to believe that, essentially because she wants to be the one to teach him love, no one else. Then we get this entire flashback back to the Heian era, where we essentially see them meet for the first time. And you'd assume, since she loves him so much, that there would be way more to this exchange, but nope, they literally just meet like once because she hugged him because he looked lonely, and then he just cut her down right afterwards. I don't know if she died at this point. She could have, or she could have like lived longer, but if she did die at this point, it means that this one situation alone was able to essentially fuel her all the love that she has for him. We then go all the way back to the present, where we see that she pulls out a perfect sphere, which is impossible because it doesn't actually have a contact area, which basically means it's creating infinite pressure. And since it's actually creating all that infinite pressure, that means that if it touches Sukuna, he's essentially dead. It's very similar to like a hollow purple. Then she also pulls out her domain expansion so that it actually has a sure hit effect of hitting him. And this basically makes her believe that there's no way out for him unless Sukuna combats her domain with his own domain. So she essentially thinks that he has to use Shrine if he wants to survive. But to her surprise, he doesn't. He does something else entirely different. He actually summons Maharaga to essentially adapt to the domain, and it just cuts right through it and then cuts through her. As she's just sitting there bleeding out, Sukuna just gloats the entire time, basically saying that he knows a lot about her ability, he studied it, and with Maharaga's adaptation, he didn't even need to pull out Shrine. And surprisingly enough, hearing all this actually makes her super happy because she's just glad that he knows all this stuff about her. She's glad that he took time out to essentially study her in order to figure out how to beat her. And this essentially makes Sukuna super disappointed, and he seems like he's just so done. He's been so done with her shit ever since the beginning because she's so delusional about their love. She then uses the very last of her power to essentially give Sukuna a present that we probably will not see until later. And the next scene, we see Megumi at the bottom of the ocean crying, essentially showing us that Sukuna's plan worked. Sukuna killing Megumi's sister using Megumi's power, essentially broke Megumi, and now he's just sitting there completely losing his will to fight off Sukuna. Okay, but obviously as per usual, before we move to the final section, I need to talk about this specific fight. I thought that it was genuinely highly entertaining because of the chemistry between these two characters, or I guess should I say the lack thereof. Because Sukuna absolutely hates this woman with a passion, and he tries his absolute best in order to show her how insignificant her life actually means to him. And he actually does it in some pretty flashy ways, because he's essentially summoning these Shikigami that Megumi was nowhere near close to actually taming. And he was using them all super efficiently while also just only being at 15 fingers still, which means he's nowhere near close his actual full power. Which actually like makes it even more interesting to figure out, or at least to see, how the heroes are actually going to face him in the end, at a point where he's probably actually going to be at full power. And then there's Yorozu, who essentially is the most delusional character I've ever seen in fiction. She believed that as long as her love was strong enough, then it could triumph over everything and anything. But the thing is, her losing against Sukuna just showed how fragile her love for him actually was, and it was based off of nothing but a shaky foundation. She wanted so desperately to teach Sukuna what the true meaning of love was, but I don't think she could actually do that, because the fact is, I don't even think she knew what love was. She definitely knows what obsession is, but obviously not actual real love. And the thing is, it's weird too, because I actually really like this character. She's not like the greatest character ever or anything in the series, but the thing is, she's pretty charismatic when she's on the same page as Sukuna. I was genuinely rooting for her to win, or at the very least to teach Sukuna some valuable lesson about himself. The only thing I truly hated about this character is the fact that she had to make her appearance through Megumi's sister. This entire battle is just so unreasonably cruel to Megumi and Sukuna, simply because these two time-displaced sorcerers took over their bodies. Sukuna killed Megumi's sister using Megumi's powers and just completely broke his spirits. And they completely robbed us of a character. Tell me why we have this character that has been seen ever since chapter 9 of this manga, where they're almost hyped up to a degree as if there's gonna be some important plot thread with Megumi. In the end, they just end up dying such a pathetic death. And I guess you could give the excuse that the entire reason she's here is to motivate the heroes to enter the Culling game so they can help Megumi save his sister, but that doesn't really work because Gojo was still in danger. They still all had to go into the Culling game regardless of whether or not they had to save her too. So she wasn't that big of a motivator. And yeah, I guess I'm kind of sad because Megumi's sad, but I mean, like, how sad can I genuinely be for a character that I never got to know? Like, I don't know her motivations, I don't know what she cared about, I don't really know her personality, and I have no idea how she even felt about dying or how she felt about being this tool for Yorozu's love. And I don't actually care that she died, because everyone dies in this series, that's very normal. I care about the fact that she died without a purpose, because she was literally just fridged, which is just like a trope where one random side character either dies or gets hurt or suffers specifically to develop another character's goals or journey or the plot or whatever. Her entire character was rushed just so that we could see the end of the Culling game, just like so many other concepts within this series, like Yuki, who essentially was a super important character who just died by the hands of her own black hole, even though she was hyped as this like super cool special grade from the beginning of the series. And don't even get me started on the entire US invasion thing. Don't get me started on the whole US military invasion thing that they skipped over. I talked about this in my last JJK video with the perfect preparation. Gege Akutame seems to just rush these plot points in order to get to these parts that he thinks that everyone's waiting for. And I don't know if it's because he specifically is impatient or if his editors just keep telling him to keep going because they think that all this shit doesn't matter. But either way, it's super prevalent at the end of the Culling game arc. And if it really is all of his editors who are essentially telling him to just move forward with everything, then I actually am really sad for him, because I know that the Culling game was specifically supposed to be like the first arc within this entire series. Like in the developmental process when he was creating everything, his entire idea for everything to lead up to it was all just supposed to be the Culling games. But of course, after some rewrites, he basically just, he did exactly what we saw within the entire series. And I feel kind of sorry because it feels like the entire idea of this arc did not pan out from his original vision. But I digress, so let's just finish up this last section. In the next chapter, Kenjaku makes 2 more rules, where essentially the first rule is that no one else is allowed to enter the Culling game, and the second rule is that As soon as everyone except himself, meaning Kenjaku, and Megumi, who is currently being possessed by Sukuna, has died, will basically mark the end of the Culling game. We also see that Angel was saved by a Mai, who essentially used his power to create a bunch of sugar for her to fall onto so that she didn't die when Sukuna threw her off the building. Which essentially means that she's actually still able to help them free Gojo, but she's not able to actually help them fight in any more battles because she's lost an arm. Choso gives Itadori a book that's essentially based all on Yuki's research on the soul, which I guess is her contribution to the entire series. Okay, fine, I guess. Hopefully that's going to lead to something more important later. Afterwards, everyone goes outside to essentially free Gojo finally with Angel's technique, which is Jacob's Ladder. Unfortunately, when she shoots Jacob's Ladder right at the back of the prison realm, it essentially just destroys it. And Gojo is nowhere to be seen, basically making everyone believe that the technique didn't work or that she ended up killing Gojo in the process because he might have been evil. But then at the same exact time, everyone starts to feel this earthquake. And we switch over to Kenjaku, essentially explaining that he put the front of the prison realm at the bottom of the ocean and had it guarded by a special grade cursed spirit, just in case Gojo escaped so that Gojo would immediately die by the special grade cursed spirit and or drowning. But now Gojo is just sitting there completely unscathed in front of him, ready to just destroy Kenjaku for what he did. But before Gojo can actually lay a finger on Kenjaku, Sukuna actually comes to his rescue, and for the first time since like chapter 2 of the series, Gojo and Sukuna lock eyes. And Sukuna actually reminds Gojo of their last conversation all that time ago, when he said that as soon as he gains control over his vessel, he was going to kill him. And that day has actually finally arrived. Gojo then proceeds to talk a bunch of shit to Sukuna, causing Urame to crash out and essentially attack Gojo. But of course, Gojo is able to take her out with a single punch, causing Kenjaku to realize that things are heating up a little too much, so he has to stop the battle by basically telling Sukuna that Sukuna still has these promises that he has to keep to Kenjaku. And it's assumed that it's because they have a binding vow with each other, and Gojo doesn't mind postponing the entire battle to the death until December 24th because he wants to keep all of his death anniversaries in line. Kenjaku asks Gojo if he doesn't expect to lose the same exact way that Itadori asked Gojo all that time ago at the beginning of the series. And Gojo gives Kenjaku the same exact answer that he gave to Itadori all that time ago. Nah, I'd win. And that is finally the end of the arc. Congratulations, we finally made it. So I can finally just talk about my pure feelings for the rest of the video. And let me tell you, this arc was mid. But like, not in like a terribly bad way or anything. I literally kind of just mean middle grade. And I guess that's just because I'm kind of comparing it to the last arc, or 2 arcs before, which was a Shibuya incident. And that was an entire arc that was simply just at its peak when it was subverting expectations constantly. But I never really felt that same energy from the Culling game, and I think that's specifically because it just feels like an overcomplicated version of like any other anime's tournament arc. But I'm pretty sure that was the entire goal of this arc, and since that was the goal, I have to give the mangaka his props because every single battle within this arc was absolutely immaculate. I know I went off before about there was like these characters who simply just were hyped up just to die and they didn't end up doing anything. But the thing is, there's like a completely opposite end of the spectrum where there were characters who were hyped up and they just didn't disappoint. There were characters who were absolutely electrifying and 100% captivated me. Like Hakari, who was hyped up alongside Yuta. And his powers are so much different from anyone else we see in the series because they're purely based on luck. And that so-called luck, it makes all of his battles seem that much more tense because seeing him hit a jackpot is like watching your favorite sports team hit a goal. And even though we saw Yuta's potential all the way back in JJK 0, seeing him progress in this entire battle royal that he's in just made his character just that much more unbelievably impressive. And I hear that some people don't like this arc specifically because it gets rid of some of the older characters that we all got to know and love. Characters like Gojo, Nanami, Kugasaki, all of the disaster curses. But honestly, I kind of love the reset, specifically because even though it replaces some characters that we knew and love, it gives us a bunch more characters that I'm absolutely hyped to see. People like Higuruma, a character like Kashimo, I absolutely can't wait to see their roles within the next arc of this series. Even characters that we probably won't ever see again were outrageously entertaining to watch. But these are all characters that I already talked about way earlier in the video, so I'm not going to go over them again. But I will, however, go over some characters that I did not talk about yet because their entire presence was scattered throughout the entire arc. First up is Megumi, who was a complete badass this entire arc. When he's on his own, one of the first things that he says is that he doesn't mind getting 100 points the normal way, which basically means that he doesn't care who he has to kill. If he has to like gain 100 points by killing a bunch of other sorcerers, he doesn't actually care. He'll just do whatever he has to do in order to save his sister. And I don't know why, but this happens like every single time Megumi is alone. Like when he fought the finger bearer, there was an entire scene where like he had to think of a stronger version of himself, and when he did that, he like got intoxicated with his own power and just went completely ballistic, not even caring if he died in the process. It's like he holds himself back whenever he's around other people, but whenever he's alone, he turns into a complete killer. And maybe that's just because he takes after his father without even knowing it. But either way, just like I said before, it's just completely badass. And I think that it's exceptionally cool that this entire arc is based around Megumi's goals specifically. Like, yes, the entire point of the arc was to save Gojo, but everyone really was assembled by Megumi because he wanted to save his sister. Even though he's a background character, he was such a strong driving force for every single character within this arc. Even Sukuna took notice of Megumi ever since the beginning and essentially wanted to covet his power. And unfortunately, Megumi had to suffer for that. For the first time in this series, we see Megumi care, and I mean really care about something. He was laser focused on the goal of saving his sister, and he put himself and everyone around him through hell in order to achieve that goal. And once he was so close to actually achieving said goal, Gege pulled the rug from right under his feet and essentially basically had Yorozu being possessed this entire time by this other ancient sorcerer. I genuinely didn't see it coming, and it's cool because it doesn't actually like contradict anything, because it's just a big oversight on the character's part. The only problem I do have with that entire twist is of course the fact that I think it would have hit harder if Sumiki was an actual character. We never get to know her, we never get to see her goals, we never get to see her personality, we just get nothing from her. So there was never a chance for the audience to ever feel like something was actually off. And as soon as we get introduced to her again, she's automatically just possessed. And even that felt rushed. Like the entire chapter leading up to this, it felt as if Gege wanted to end the Culling game as soon as possible. But even though I felt like the ending was rushed, I still thought that it was actually pretty amazing still. Sukuna's return didn't just shake up the arc and put a halt to the Culling game, it felt like it actually shook up the entire series. At this point, we really don't know much about Sukuna, but you can't help but love him because he's so damn charismatic. And I think it was an amazing decision to not have Sukuna really show up anywhere in this arc until the very end, because it made me really crave his appearance. And this appearance did not disappoint, because we basically saw him enact a plan that he was planning ever since he laid eyes on Megumi. And having this arc end on Sukuna declaring his final battle with Gojo, which is a battle that we've been waiting for since the beginning of the series, is just a cherry on top to this entire like situation. It's like the best case scenario that we could possibly have when it comes to Sukuna coming back now. But I can't talk about the main villain of the series without talking about the main hero of this series. I was wrong about Yuji Itadori. In my last video with the Perfect Preparation arc, I essentially said that like I found his entire shtick boring. I didn't like the entire cog mentality. I didn't like the lack of motivation, and I found it all super boring. I genuinely couldn't connect with it. And eventually some very nice people in the comments went down into the comments and told me the reason for why I didn't understand it, and it's because I simply just lack media literacy. And that's not me being like ironic or anything, like I'm being dead serious. Like I somehow completely just overlooked the fact that Itadori genuinely doesn't have any more motivation in life, simply because his life is the reason for why so many people have suffered. Like his entire existence has added to other people's misery. Because people like Megumi and Gojo want Itadori to live, along with Itadori himself wanting to live a meaningful life in death, the decision ended up killing thousands. But Todo essentially taught him that he can't just give up, because giving up is like spitting in the face of all the comrades who helped him to achieve said goals. So his only option left is to become a cog in Jujutsu society. In his mind, the only way he could possibly repent is by sacrificing himself and his happiness for others' sake, because nothing he ever does will ever amount to all of the lives that Sukuna took under his body. Another thing that I need to admit with Itadori is the fact that I actually like his escalation with power. Normally in like other animes with other main characters, like they always just have like one attack where they just have to just brute force through like everything without ever learning anything else within their respective world's power system. And at first I felt like that with Itadori, until I realized that I could be a little more lenient on Itadori, because he's not just brute forcing his way through everything, he actually uses a lot of finesse in all of his attacks. Like everything he does is smarter, like just the way that he like just decides to just throw a rock at someone during the Culling game, and he just realizes that the reason why it was able to work is because they used a binding vow to strengthen the top half of their body but not the lower half. And sometimes I'll say even the brute force stuff is kind of cool, like the fact that in that same fight he was able to just fly through a bunch of buildings across the city and didn't take a lick of damage from that attack. It genuinely does show that he's just overall more developed as a character from the beginning of the series when we first saw him. Oh, and since we're on the topic of fights, I just want to say that the fights within the Culling game are extremely fun, simply because they're so much different from other fights. Because like in the beginning with Itadori when he fights Higuruma, the entire fight is based off like a court system. And the next fight with Megumi is decided by who can carry more weight. Like all these fights remind me of like Togashi's fights from Hunter x Hunter. Like all of them just seem so creative and just so much fun all around. But I think that's actually everything I have to say about this entire review of the Culling game, because I didn't really write anything else down in my script. I think I just got tired. So I think I'm just gonna end the main part of the video here. So this is just the segment where I tell you about stuff. I got a new Discord. That's cool. I didn't tell anyone else about it, so like there's no one in it right now. I'm gonna put it in the description. Another thing, buy this book. I made this book. If you're interested in story, if you want to see my take on storytelling, then this is a whole entire fantasy book that has to go on with magic and adventures, and it's just fun. That's also in the description. Just look that up too. Second book is currently in development, so you know it's gonna be an entire series. If you want to get caught up now, you don't want to wait for that. What else do I want to talk about? I'm sorry it took so long for this video. It's been like it's been a while. I've been on like 2 vacations in the middle of it. I have a horrible focusing problem, but I finally filmed it. Still gotta edit all of it. If you want to help me like focus on these videos a little bit more, then maybe, I don't know, consider subscribing, liking. I still would like to get to 1,000 subscribers. I'm not there yet. I'd like to get there eventually. Oh, also tell me if you guys like the whole entire setup that with the screens and stuff. I don't know, that was experimental. I wasn't using the light at first, so I understand that the video is most likely just gonna be mad dark, and that's probably a huge mistake, but I said screw it. This might be fun. It's experimental. Nah, I'd win. Subscribing is gonna be real important if you want to see the final part of, let's talk about the Shinjuku showdown. That's gonna be cool if you want to see that. And yeah, I think that's it. See ya.